Reborn as the Viking Pirate King. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction, so please don't attempt real magic. The results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 276 Conspiracy. 2 days later, in Conqueror's Fortress, the early spring weather in Dark Feather Plain remained chilly, but as sunlight slanted into the light-touched hall, Ivar O'Sullivan chose to hold a royal meeting on the top floor of Conqueror's Fortress. 3 people sat beside him, the leader being none other than the long-vanished storm monk the wise Nibru. Below him sat Wesker Sabertooth, the leader of this round of saber-tooth mercenaries, and Ivar's lieutenant, his almost constant chief of staff. He had no name, only a codename, Black Shark. Despite the slanting sunlight, the light-touched hall remained chilly. After dismissing the maids and servants, only 4 people remained in the empty hall. They sat around a round table. In the center of the table lay a paper letter, about half a foot long. In the center of the letter was a pattern drawn with a delicate quill. It was a simple circle, its edge engraved with a circle of characters uncharacteristic of any human civilization. The pattern was meticulously crafted. It was obvious that this was the work of a professional artist. To accurately depict the ring's identity, the meticulous artist even used 3 different brushstroke thicknesses, meticulously recreating even the subtle cracks and stone textures within the ring. Below the pattern, a single line of text appeared: I know you've already deployed your troops. You can handle this yourself. This is, Master Nibru, your guess is correct. This is the portal key to Asgard. After Ivar spoke, the 3 present gazed at the letter in the center of the round table, a long silence falling. Replicating a copper ring key to Asgard wouldn't be difficult, but Master Nibru, as Ivar's spy for Duke Bernard, had personally handled the copper ring. He knew the markings and chaotic scratches couldn't be faked. This item was indeed the authentic one. Furthermore, the Zoroastrian intelligence dealers were incredibly professional. Since it had been certified by the artist, the letter must have been freshly crafted 2 days ago. There was no way Loki had drawn it in advance and deceived them. The firebearers, who made their living selling intelligence, would not do anything that would undermine their reputation. The authenticity of their intelligence was the foundation of their existence. Ivar had indeed prepared his troops. He had already purchased intelligence from the Zoroastrians, and learned that Loki had arrived on English soil. At this moment, he was trapped in the Sea-Watch fortress. This opportunity was a godsend for the Viking king. In recent days, he had gathered his vassals and assembled 200 longships, preparing to sail to the river valley. This move was intended, firstly, to empty Loki's homeland and rescue his sister, who was imprisoned by Loki. Secondly, it would also, to some extent, appease the anger of the English. As long as they refrained from attacking Scandinavia, Ivar was confident that he could maintain the balance of power through the mediation of the Illuminati. Yet, despite all his calculations, he had never imagined Loki would be so daring as to possess the key to the Asgard portal. For centuries, within the Holy Mountain, there had been only one portal leading to Asgard. Late last autumn, after the battle within the Holy Mountain ended, Ivar discovered that the portal had been taken by Loki. He had intended to immediately dispatch his army to attack the Riverdale. However, winter had arrived, and widespread snow had frozen the sea. The Skybreak Mountains were impassable in winter. Forcing his way through the Skybreak Mountains would only result in the deaths of countless soldiers. Therefore, he abandoned the plan. Now, he faced a difficult choice. Should he continue with his original plan to attack the Riverdale? Or should he reverse course and steer his fleet towards Sea-Watch, rescuing Loki from the English siege? My king, no, Wesk, the leader of the saber-tooth mercenaries, said gravely. Last autumn, our longships were utterly annihilated by the English at sea. Although our shipyards have begun constructing rams for large-scale naval battles, with Viking production capacity now, it will take at least 10 years to reach a sufficient level. Relying solely on longships, without rams to escort us, an encounter with the English Navy would only result in a massacre. Before Ivar could say anything, Master Nibru shook his head. No, I've been circling the seas for a long time recently, and the English fleet has completely retreated to the vicinity of Sea-Watch Fortress. According to intelligence circulated by the Zoroastrians before the war, all supplies for the supply fleet's third patrol of the North Sea were deposited at Sea-Watch Fortress. Now that the fortress has been occupied by Loki, the ships have lost their supply base. They can no longer patrol. As long as Loki survives, we should be safe for the time being. Master Nibiru's Raven Path had reached Sequence 4, Storm Crow. At this level, in addition to his usual divination and stargazing, he could also transform himself into a soaring raven through magic. It was with this power that he retreated when Loki led his army to capture Storm's End, flying to the Conqueror's fortress on the other side of Mount Skybreak. What do you think? Ever turned to look at the mysterious figure beside him? Normally, this figure was elusive and rarely appeared in public. Even when he did appear, he was always dressed in a loose black robe, his face covered by a black cloth, revealing only his two slender eyes. All the other O'Sullivan family staff knew about him was his nickname, Black Shark. Beyond that, they knew nothing. The Viking King turned to his chief of staff. Master Nibiru and Wesk were both silent. After a long pause, a raspy voice like sand and gravel rubbing against iron filings reached him. After a long silence, Black Shark finally spoke. My king, perhaps my opinion may seem a bit exaggerated to others, but I still say that this Duke Loki is the strongest opponent you have faced since ascending the throne. Before setting out on this expedition, this brat had calculated everything. Dragging us into battle was his plan, formulated long before we set out. And the most painful thing about this plan is that we have no choice but to accept it, because the portal to Asgard is a treasure that the Vikings cannot discard. Black Shark's voice had a natural metallic quality, a raspy sound like the grinding of iron filings that made one inexplicably irritated and uneasy. His Viking accent was completely different from that of the 7 provinces. The elderly Master Nibiru had no idea where this man came from, how old he was, or what deity he worshipped. But he knew that when Black Shark spoke, it was best for others to keep quiet and not interrupt him. The people of Eastland often say, know yourself and your enemy. And you can fight 100 battles without danger. It means we must understand our opponent in order to predict his actions. Loki is a man who knows how to seize opportunities and profit from turbulent waters. Ever since his conflict with Duke Bernard 2 years ago, he knew how to drag Blood Pigeon Town and Fogduck Town into the fray, creating a 4-way melee and igniting everyone's conflicts to secure a chance of survival. During last year's joint Slavic and English invasion, he took this tactic to extremes. He exploited the tank people he had provoked in Conqueror's fortress, wielding them alongside the English who had landed in Coldwater Village. Then, he drove back Humbush to attack the Holy Mountain. When both sides were devastated, he opened a portal and released all the Vikings hidden in that mysterious city. He's a venomous snake who knows how to exploit conflicts between enemies to create opportunities. It's foreseeable that if we're drawn into this war, we'll inevitably be exploited at some point. But everyone, please forgive me for being blunt. We have no choice but to be exploited. Chapter 277 Entering the Game. Black Shark gazed out at the sea off Conqueror's fortress. The Thud Sea appeared calm, but Ivar immediately understood Black Shark's concerns. This winter in Yinayu Plain had been anything but peaceful. Throughout the long winter, they often heard the shrieking cries of enormous monsters crashing through the ice and landing. After daybreak, patrols emerging from the castle could see broken ice and the wet tracks of massive footprints along the coast. These tracks, rather than reaching the city, skirted Conqueror's fortress and entered the Shyandran Mountains east of Yinayu Plain. Meanwhile, the shadows of giant beasts passing low overhead could often be seen above the thick clouds. At first, Ivar thought it was just a few sporadic dragons of the subspecies that had flown unsupervised into Scandinavia. However, as more and more unknown monsters appeared, he summoned his staff to brave the freezing cold and investigate. 6 months later, Master Nibiru, who possessed the ability to soar, reported, I can sense that many enormous monsters are hiding in the sky-breaking mountains. The desolate sky-breaking mountains are home to the richest psychic energy in the entire western continent. While soaring in the sky, I can't see the giant beasts on the ground, but I can sense that they seem to be hiding in the valleys, recovering the energy they've expended traveling through time and space. My theory is that this is most likely a new invasion by the outer gods. In the bitter cold of the far north, the once stable blue sky is likely to crack again. Master Nibiru had not accompanied Loki on his expedition against a Leviathan, so he was unaware that a deceased old one lay dead on the sea not far from the Scandinavian peninsula. The energy released by the Leviathan's explosion shattered Night City and its supporting turtle shell, but even so, a small number of monsters, using their tenacious vitality, managed to survive from the ruins of the city beneath the shell. It took them nearly 9 months to carve a hole through the dead Leviathan's body for their escape, finally returning to Earth's land. The hunters from Frostwater Village, who had accompanied Loki out to sea, were not above keeping their secrets. However, because the exploding Leviathan story sounded so fantastical, it became a topic of conversation, seemingly untrue. Over time, no one discussed it. The story of Loki, Leviathan, and Windswan remained confined to Frostwater Village, not spreading widely. Even Master Nibiru, who resided in Storm's End, had never heard of it. Therefore, he could only rely on his meisters to interpret the strange events unfolding before him, and such occurrences were not unheard of in history. Every invasion of the human world by the outer gods brought devastating devastation. This time, however, the invasion was so close to Scandinavia. They had to immediately mobilize and prepare a defense plan. If the key to the Asgard portal fell into the hands of the English at this critical juncture, the Vikings would lose their status as the chosen ones and face a potentially catastrophic disaster. According to the intelligence we've received so far, the English are likely unaware of the massive invasion of demons into Scandinavia. Every outer god invasion severely impacts the world order, even leading to the permanent extinction of certain races. Those Zoroastrian charlatans will surely demand exorbitant prices. If the English knew of this, I'm afraid the seven rulers wouldn't just forge a superficial alliance like they have today. Each would seek to weaken their allies through the Vikings. If they knew the outer god invasion was real, they would truly unite. If that had happened, our friend Loki would have been dead long ago. Being temporarily exploited isn't a big deal. The crucial thing is to save Loki, obtain the key to Asgard, and then conceal ourselves. Scandinavia has no fertile land and no population. The gods look down on this remote, bitterly cold land of ours. If we rescue Loki, these suddenly appearing outer gods will help us crush England and the rest of the western continent. When there were all but 200 dead, Black Shark made a gesture to intervene, and the others immediately understood. Well, it seems there's no better solution for now. Touching the Erothith sword hanging beside him, Eivor closed his eyes and said thoughtfully, well, starting today, everyone will transport supplies to the longship. 3 days later, we'll depart from the harbor and head for Sea-Watch Fortress. 7 days later, Sea-Watch Fortress. Loki, Girwall, and Satyr stood atop the fortress's high walls, gazing skyward. A large flock of crows circled the fortress's summit, cawing loudly as they surrounded a massive, deep blue alien creature. Boss, how could you possibly trust that old Francis? I've always said, eyes are the windows to the soul. In the forest, only the eyes of wild wolves and mountain rabbits will subconsciously roll around. Don't be fooled by the honest appearance of Archbishop Francis. He is actually a fence-sitter who changes his mind according to the situation. When he arrived in this land, he might have already fled as soon as he saw that we were surrounded. You really trust him to put such a precious portal key in his hands? In recent days, Loki has been worried until today when he saw a group of crows circling on the top of the Sea-Watch Fortress, and he finally felt relieved. However, Gulor obviously did not understand what he meant. These Englishmen are very cunning. They surrounded us for nearly half a month, but never launched a single attack. Not only did they not attack the city, they didn't even waste a single crossbow arrow. Even if they appeared to be doing nothing, I could hear them secretly chipping away at the walls every night while I lay on the outer walls. I have a feeling their goal isn't to breach the walls, but to reach the water source deeper within. Sea-Watch Fortress's water source is a 50-meter deep well. In preparation for a Viking invasion, the English coalition had stored a vast amount of food within the fortress, enough to feed 6,000 Viking soldiers even if the siege lasted a year. The only thing that could truly shake the defenders at their core was this deep well. If the water source were contaminated, the Vikings, left with nowhere to escape, would be forced to flee the city and risk their lives. And that's exactly what the English coalition wanted. Boss, we have to act. They've been digging for at least 7 days. I can feel them right under our feet. Don't wait until they poison the well and we're all exhausted before launching an attack. If that happens, this battle is doomed. Chapter 278 Tactical Game. The Greedy Wolf and Satyr had completely different personalities. Gruel's greatest characteristic was his proactive approach to identifying problems and seeking solutions. In life, he was a man who always sought initiative. He spoke without hesitation about what he wanted. He never hid the occasional flash of inspiration that came to his mind, but rather expressed it immediately. His actions mirrored those of the dire wolves of the forest. Wolves never waited until they were hungry to forage for food. They spent their lives proactively attacking. They would rather go hungry than wait until they were exhausted from hunger. Proactive attack was a lifelong principle for wolves. Gruel's concerns were indeed justified. During his time trapped in the Sea-Watch fortress, Loki made two important discoveries. First, every nation in this plane had a reason for existence. If caught off guard, the nations of England could be severely ravaged by the Vikings. However, if the two nations engaged in direct combat, their very existence on this land would not be vulnerable to being exploited. Secondly, the English were clearly ahead of their time in their warfare. To the Vikings, victory consisted of charge, swing the axe, and chop off the enemy's head. These three simple actions were repeated thousands of times until the last enemy on the battlefield fell. Naturally, they achieved victory. Throughout this entire battle, only muscles, axes, and companions were essential. In the bloody fray, brains were merely a burden. Across the North Sea, the English displayed a completely different tactical and technical prowess. They relied not on individual soldiers but on the vast productive forces of their entire nation to confront the enemy. Since the capture of Sea-Watch Fortress, not a single bloody clash had broken out between the two armies. Simply by constructing fortifications daily outside the city, the Vikings were slowly being driven into a desperate situation. Fortunately, Loki had anticipated the possibility of a disadvantage before setting out. Once at a disadvantage, the key to victory lay in the hands of Father Francis. From the perspective of a previous life, this old monk, weighing over 200 kilograms, was a true survivalist. He tirelessly examines his surroundings and ensures he always lives in conditions that are favorable to him. To this end, he readily abandons all external possessions, such as religion, faith, and nationality. It was precisely because of this trait that all 1,500 English soldiers led by Lettuce, all the noblemen who chanted justice, honor, for the king, perished. Ultimately, only Francis, a fence-sitter, survived. Outsiders see such a faithless individual as unworthy. What even the Vikings knew, the English must understand as well. But Loki sees it differently. He sees Father Francis as more approachable than anyone else around him because, in his previous life, everyone in his environment was like this. In the frenetic and hectic world of the 21st century, anyone who manages to own a home and raise children in the Magic City is a survivalist. They rise to power by stepping on countless losers, ultimately earning the right to survive in the metropolis. Humans tend to use familiar men. The saying like generals lead like soldiers is precisely this principle. For this reason, Loki placed his bet on Archbishop Francis. He firmly believed the old man possessed a brilliant mind, capable of discerning the situation amidst the chaos and securing reinforcements from across the North Sea. Until today, when he saw the ravens circling the castle roof, he knew his plan had succeeded. He had dragged the Viking king into the vortex of this chaotic conflict. He had met Ivar O'Sullivan before, and had had a brief encounter with him in Conqueror's Fortress. The ruler of a small kingdom in a remote and untamed land, at the age of nearly 30, had built Conqueror's Fortress to this level of sophistication. While he might not be a business genius like Morgan or Rockefeller, he was at least considered a young talent in this dimension. A calculating businessman like him would never make such a foolish decision as leading a fleet directly into the enemy lines to rescue himself, while the mantis stalks the cicada, the oriole is waiting behind. In any battle involving three factions, the last one turn to reaps the greatest rewards. By this time, Ivar must have sailed his fleet to a remote bay in the English Isles, dispatching his chosen ones of the soaring raven path daily to observe from above when the decisive battle with the English coalition would begin. He would wait until the battle was nearing its endgame before leading his forces into battle to reap the rewards. No matter what, his arrival gave me an extra layer of security. Loki's concern stemmed from his intuition. His instinct told him that the English coalition couldn't be limited to the small force he saw. In the forests beyond Sea-Watch Fortress, he couldn't see how many more men the English coalition had hidden. He couldn't tell what their deployment was, what their military units were, and how much danger they posed to him. With no information available, he needed a margin of error. If he were ever to find himself in a hopeless situation, the O'Sullivan family's saber-toothed mercenaries would desperately try to rescue him. They couldn't afford to permanently lose the portal key. This gave him the opportunity to take a gamble. But on the other hand, leading the army out of the fortress, using the flesh and blood of the Vikings to fight against the traps and siege towers outside, was not a wise move at all. Mercia's ability to remain undefeated among the Seven Kingdoms was due to their tactical system, which must have been tempered by countless battles. Even if the powerful Viking warriors could penetrate the numerous defenses and execute their tactics with pinpoint accuracy, Sea-Watch was only the first battle they faced upon landing on the English Isles. If Mercia alone among the Seven Kingdoms inflicted heavy casualties on his army, Loki had no idea how the subsequent battles would proceed. Brother Glor is right. We should indeed take the offensive, however, an all-out attack is not wise. I have a more sophisticated method that can bypass the plows, crossbows, and trenches overhead and directly reach the English rear. Captain, with all due respect, we don't have an air force. What are you doing? Loki remained silent, pointing a finger at the well in the center of the fortress courtyard. Listen, they've already dug it all for us. Chapter 279 Underground Offensive. Hurry. Brothers, hurry up, see the sand in front of us? It's noticeably moist, which means the well is just ahead. The man in charge of digging this tunnel was the mine manager of a copper mine in the Iron Shitter Mountains of the Kingdom of Mercia. He had spent almost his entire 50-plus years digging underground, so Prince Lancelot entrusted him with this arduous task. And the mine manager lived up to expectations. Based on the soldier's general description of the well's location and his precise assessment of the soil's moisture level in the pitch-black underground, he led the excavation team to accurately locate the well, which was only 3 meters in diameter. Now, he was dangling ever closer to the well's wall, formed of stacked stone blocks. Hurry up, see this wet soil? We are very close, let's finish this job quickly. Prince Lancelot has already said that as long as we do this passage, we brothers will have completed this military service. We have to go home quickly. Spring is here. If we don't go home to help our husbands sow seeds, we will have to spend money to buy food this year. The mine manager spoke indignantly and involuntarily increased the speed of swinging the shovel, wishing he could dig through the hole immediately. That's right, his subordinate chimed in. We toil year-round, mining, and the silver we earn ends up going to those vampire-like French merchants. Haha, I wonder why the Lord Jesus Christ would grant those Frenchmen such fertile land. Boss, did you know? On French soil, skilled wheat farmers can harvest 3 crops a year. Simply relying on the land, their yield is 3 times ours. I wonder what blessings these beasts must have accumulated in their past lives. While chatting about their almost daily complaints, the workers digging the tunnels worked in perfect order. 4 men worked side by side in the front, 3 followed closely behind, laying iron frames to prevent collapse, and a dozen more pushed carts to carry the excavated soil away. This small team of nearly 20 had worked together for a long time. The discipline they developed was ingrained in their bones. They advanced rapidly underground. As the moisture in the soil ahead grew thicker, the captain, wielding his shovel at the front, gradually slowed his pace. Raising his kerosene lamp, he slowly extended the iron rod forward, gently scraping off the last layer of dirt clinging to the stone bricks. As the bluish-gray bricks emerged under the kerosene lamp's light, everyone behind the captain gasped. Everyone, keep your voices down. You know, those Vikings are right above us. Don't worry. We're digging a full 20 meters deep. This deep, even if we sang opera, no one would hear us. Clang clang clang. He tapped the bricks in front of him lightly with his shovel. Hurry, mark the tunnel and reinforce it. Back row, hurry and move the dirt. By this time tomorrow, we should be on our way home. The excited captain, expecting cheers from his companions, said this. But as he turned, holding the kerosene lamp high, he saw all the team members staring at him with utter horror. Boss, hand, as he turned, a massive, pitch-black hand reached out from between the bricks, appearing before the excavation captain's eyes. With a crash of crumbling bricks, several Vikings took the initiative to tear open the well wall. Like demons crawling out of hell, they suddenly appeared before the Mercian miners. Hey! Dear English friend, I need you to hold your breath right now. Before the captain could react, the Viking grabbed him by the collar and tossed him into the deep well. The workers following him immediately fled. However, the narrow mine was never a good place to escape. The Slavic hunter pulled out his grappling hook and tied them up securely. Loki sideways, placing them one by one on a platform suspended from the shaft, signaled the Viking warriors guarding the wellhead to pull them up. In the Middle Ages, There was only one person in the entire valley capable of digging a tunnel directly from the bottom to the well. For such valuable skilled workers, Loki would do whatever it took to save their lives. Brothers above the well, there's another unfortunate soul who's fallen to the bottom. If possible, don't forget to rescue him. With that, he and 10 carefully selected Viking warriors, including Geralt and Sat, entered the mine. Inside, Loki, walking at the front with a kerosene lamp aloft, marveled at the exquisite craftsmanship of the English miners. In the pitch-black underground world, accurately determining horizontality is a difficult task. Yet, as he walked through the tunnel, he noticed that this section of the mine was remarkably smooth. Every 3 meters, a sturdy frame constructed of solid wood and steel nails was erected, ensuring the passage's strong support and preventing collapse. Even their feet were covered with round sleepers for anti-slip protection. I never imagined a tunnel used for poisoning could be so meticulously constructed. It seemed that, after Ulysses's vigorous development, the kingdom of Mercia had even developed the rudiments of industrialization and standardization across all industries. The old man he had imprisoned within the castle was clearly a master of business. As they advanced along the passage, they eliminated several cartloads of soil being transported out of the mine. By the time they reached the mine's exit, it was already late at night. To maintain their secrecy, Loki and his companions donned miners' uniforms and wheeled carts of soil out. They had expected guards at the mine's entrance to question them. However, upon exiting, they were greeted by an unusual bustle of construction activity under the night sky. The other side of the entrance led to a warehouse not far from the castle. Vast quantities of lumber, steel, and other construction materials were stored there. Despite the late hour, overworked craftsmen were still pushing carts of materials through the area. Everyone's expressions were solemn and their steps hurried. No one paid any attention to Loki and his men pushing carts of dirt. According to my conversation with old man Ulysses a few days ago, he said that if Seawatch Fortress falls, the English coalition's headquarters will most likely be located in an apple orchard not far from the city. Brothers, let's unload these 2 carts of dirt and capture a few of their best foes before the night wears on. Right now, we only have one, Ulysses Illa. That's too small a bargaining chip. Today, let's capture at least 3 or 4 of their princes. Let's see if they still have the guts to poison the well. Chapter 280 Night Attack. The apple plantation wasn't far from the Seawatch Fortress. After slipping out of the bustling construction warehouse, no one paid them any attention. They shed their mud-stained coats and walked along the dark country roads, not even seeing a single patrol. An hour later, they arrived at the outskirts of an exquisite manor. Yes, this must be it. I see many soldiers patrolling the manor, and if I'm not mistaken, most of them are chosen ones under the holy bishop. I see that white light emanating from them. Geralt's eyes gleamed with excitement, and even the satyr, unable to contain his raging muscles, considered charging into the manor immediately. The Vikings' favorite enemy was the equally barbaric Slavs across the Baltic Sea. In battles with the Slavs, both sides roared and drew their weapons, often deciding the outcome within 10 minutes. Those still breathing roared their victory, while those who were no longer breathing joyfully went to meet Odin. Simple, thrilling, and direct. In the short lives of most Vikings, they had never experienced such a frustrating battle as these past few days. Lacking ranged attack methods and unable to break out of the fortress, they could only watch helplessly as the English engineers built fortifications right up to the city walls. Standing 30 meters high, they could only watch helplessly as these men displayed their might beneath the walls. But Loki had issued an order, forbidding anyone from leaving the city. Now, 2 weeks later, they finally had another chance to pound their axes into the enemy's skulls. But not everyone enjoyed this opportunity. Let me reiterate, the main purpose of this operation is to capture the leaders and generals of the English coalition forces. My lords, the weapons in your hands are not hatchets, but these sacks. Before we set out, I have already told you in detail what the English nobles probably look like, the kind of fat pigs with fat all over their bodies that shake when they run. There are also people with curly hair that look androgynous, and those who smell of powder. Soldiers with such moral character will never be drafted into the army, so on the battlefield, those who look so weird must be English nobles. Whenever you see such people, don't ask too many questions, just put them in a sack and take them away. With this group of fat sheep under control, let alone polluting the water source, even if we run out of food, these English gentlemen outside the city will have to send us food. Do you understand? Only by capturing a group of fat sheep can we have the capital to continue consuming. We must capture them alive. Dead people are worthless. After finalizing the entire battle plan, Loki assigned half his forces to guard the manor's perimeter. After beheading the stablehund, 3 Viking berserkers took charge of the stables, filled with purebred horses, and the luxurious carriages outside. With all preparations complete, the Viking warriors abandoned their concealment. A satyr blew his horn, and his men, drawing their axes and roaring, charged towards the holy bishop's guards guarding the gate. Dazzling fire and lightning surged from their bodies. Facing an enemy nearly 10 times their number, the Viking warriors showed no fear. During the siege of Sea-Watch Fortress 2 weeks prior, they had already discovered the English soldiers' fragility. Without the strength of high-sequence experts like Jerome and Lawrence, most English soldiers wouldn't even be able to withstand a single berserker's blow. Amidst the shrill cries and the thick rain of blood, Loki strolled leisurely through the manor, even reaching for a bottle of wine from the tea room and taking a few sips. With the door blocked, the nobles, with nowhere to escape, leaped from the high windows. But they were immediately captured by the Viking warriors guarding the manor's perimeter. Sacks were insufficient, so the pirates resorted to the age-old Viking method, breaking the nobles' limbs, tying them at the ankles with ropes, and dragging the nobles along behind them like salted fish. Brothers, we only have 1 hour. After 1 hour, everyone must evacuate the manor, as reinforcements may arrive. Don't just focus on killing, remember to kidnap. Especially find this man named Egbert. His family crest is a 2-headed griffin. If we can capture this old man, this war could be over in 10 days. Honestly, Loki wasn't a murderer. From the rooms to either side, 1 or 2 knights in open armor occasionally darted out, knocking out those worthless kidnappers with his fists. Since drinking the golden potion and acquiring this body imbued with the blood of the ancient Vikings, all of whose skills and tactics have become primitive. As the Frost Giant King had said, humanity, too, was not born on this planet. Humanity's present state stems from its inexplicable degeneration over millions of years. Once, the ancient Vikings were able to drive the frost giants from their lands without relying on any outer gods. Nuwa and Fuxi of the eastern continent could refine stones to patch the heavens, blocking the outer gods' access to Earth. They went from being powerful outer gods to relying on the power of the ancient gods for survival. Today, even the new gods, born of humanity, can control their minds. This has happened in just 10,000 years. After consuming the golden potion and activating the blood of the ancients, Loki discovered that this body had no sequence paths or sequence levels. He could no longer use magical powers like fire-breathing, lightning-inducing, shape-shifting, or divination, but its power was raw and direct. In Asgard, he could chase any beast on foot. Now, facing the English soldiers charging at him with drawn swords, he could send them flying with a single blow. Entering combat mode, everything around him automatically slowed to a crawl before his eyes. And whenever he was consumed by rage, his body heated up, creating a thick, white vapor. In this state, his strength multiplied manyfold, allowing him to shatter the steel armor of an English knight with his bare hands. The golden-armored giant was right. In terms of sheer physical strength, the boiling bloodline of the Viking ancestors was no less frail than the bodies transformed by the bloody creator. Just as humans wouldn't lose their temper with the little cats and dogs or the scraps of books around them, after countless battles with the gods, ordinary humans no longer seemed a threat to his life. Strolling leisurely, he reached the manor's rooftop. There, a young woman in a linen robe stood, facing the wind. The apple orchard was already ablaze, and the manor was filled with shrill cries and cries of death. Amidst this infernal scene, a young woman stood on the manor's rooftop, her hands behind her back. The bright moonlight shone on her simple robe, making it look surprisingly sacred against a backdrop of the thick smoke behind her. My men have already entered, and everyone else in this manor is fleeing. Why aren't you running? Loki slowly approached her and stood beside her. The girl didn't speak, nor did she turn back. Judging from her attire, she bore no resemblance to the word noble, but a person's outward appearance could not be hidden. Although Loki had spent half a winter with the Viking princess Marindin, the noble princess from Constantinople always had a strong merchant's air about her. The woman before him, on the other hand, was as innocent as an orchid in a valley. Even now, he folded his hands, praying for the gardeners fleeing downstairs. Chapter 281 Confrontation. The next morning, a long line of hostages was dragged like cattle into the encirclement of Sea-Watch. Before Loki could even utter a word, the Mercian captain immediately ordered everyone to lay down their weapons. For the first of the hostages was King Ailerii of Northumbria, with his enormous belly. Behind him were King Ranshor of Kent, Crusader Captain Hamilton, and a long line of high-ranking military leaders. During a head count early in the morning, Loki discovered that the only two key targets absent from the group were King Ecbert of Wessex and Prince Lancelot of Mercia. If his team had been luckier yesterday and captured these two, the war might even have ended. Under the gaze of countless Ballistian lancers, the group swaggered back to Sea-Watch. For a moment, it was impossible to tell whether they were trapped or triumphant generals. With so many distinguished guests suddenly present in the prisoner of war camp, the Mercian engineering team, as Loki had predicted, abandoned their plans for poisoning. Surprisingly, Loki chose not to leave the city to fight the enemy, nor to use the hostages to initiate negotiations. A stalemate ensued, both inside and outside the fortress. This stalemate lasted for half a month, or 15 days. No one knew what the Viking Duke was up to. The soldiers observing from the towers only knew that he would periodically drag a few kings up to the city walls for a stroll, reminding the soldiers outside that their kings were still alive. Beyond that, it was a long, tedious stalemate. "This guy, he's not trying to wear us out here, is he?" The Mercian captain, in charge of the entire Sea-Watch siege plan, asked his lieutenant in confusion. "Doesn't he know that with the production capacity of the 7 kingdoms of England, we can afford to outlast him for another 10 years? The lieutenant smiled wryly and shook his head. If they had understood the Vikings' true intentions, this war wouldn't even have started. Astute kings have 100 ways to wear them down through agreements and negotiations, rather than passively engaging in combat. Sir, I don't understand why these Vikings haven't demanded gold from us yet. Aren't these beasts out to sea plundering just for gold? They've almost gathered half the royal families of the 7 kingdoms of England. With that kind of leverage, they could negotiate even for half the kingdom. But look, the Grand Master in charge of the negotiations has been turned away for days straight. Could it be that this Viking lord has captured 3 kings for some ulterior motive? While the generals outside the city were bewildered, the kings, generals, and nobles imprisoned within were equally baffled. Loki didn't mistreat them. Instead, he dined them well and even brought in servants to take care of their daily needs. The English nobles weren't afraid of Viking pirates demanding money or making outrageous demands. As long as they made the offer, they'd be open to negotiation. What they feared most was Loki remaining silent throughout the entire process, as he did now, without any substantive communication. He neither demanded any conditions nor endangered their lives. Playing by the rules isn't scary, it's those who can't figure it out that are the most troublesome. Meanwhile, Loki, the subject of everyone's speculation, was dining as usual in the castle's top-floor suite with honest Ella, the Lord of Mercia. With a host of lords and nobles in hand, Loki could safely delegate the cooking duties to the English servants. Consequently, the fortress's fare had improved significantly. Today's meal consisted of peas stewed with beef, served with a long baguette. Carrying the food into the room, Loki first served a bowl to the old man. The following night, instead of placing it in front of him, he offered it to the white-clad girl across the round table. On the night of the apple orchard raid, the white-clad girl on the manor roof, after praying for the dead, faced Loki with a question and a request. She asked, "Are you a Viking lord?" Loki nodded. The girl gazed at him, her azure eyes seemingly piercing his soul. "Take me to see my father. I miss him." And so, Elizabeth Ella was taken back to Sea-Watch Fortress by Loki. She became the only hostage allowed to roam freely within the castle. Loki discovered that Elizabeth was a true saint. Before meeting this young woman, Jerome was his ideal of what a saint should be. However, compared to Elizabeth, Jerome ultimately possessed a touch more humanity. During the defense of Frostwater Village, he took up arms without hesitation, slashing at Duke Bernard's private troops. And after the battle, he took up arms to send the dying to heaven, a feat he also performed without hesitation. Elizabeth, however, was different. After entering Sea-Watch Fortress, even though the Viking warriors around her were her enemies, she would use her holy light spells to heal the sick or wounded upon sight. After a brief encounter with Loki, she immediately took a new look at the legendary Viking barbarian, realizing how he had immediately freed the city's inhabitants and artisans after capturing the city. This respect transcended race, class, and status. In the girl's eyes, he was even more merciful than most of the holy bishops and generals. For the past 10 days, Loki had dined with Ella and his daughter almost daily. Initially stiff, they began chatting about English customs, and after 10 days, most of their differences had been bridged. Finally, on this day, as the old man shoved his first spoonful of food into his mouth, he asked a question that had been nagging at him for so long. Duke Loki, what exactly do you want? He had captured 3 of the 7 kingdoms of England, over 40 hereditary nobles, and nearly 100 generals. If Duke Loki's demands were simply land, as he claimed, he would have enough leverage to acquire nearly any province in any English kingdom. Even if he demanded more, he could easily launch a lofty negotiation. Hostages are a time-sensitive resource. If the situation dragged on, and a new king was elected within the kingdom, his hostages would immediately become worthless. Faced with this question, Loki simply smiled and shook his head. Old man, I once said that I need land. With all due respect to my men, it would be a piece of cake to seize territory by force. However, if I do this, I will be caught on the endless resistance of the people of Mercia. To put it bluntly, whether culturally, economically, or even militarily, I do not have the ability to fight against the vast sea of people. If I really do this, the most likely thing to happen is that both my warriors and the people of the kingdom of Mercia will fall into the abyss. Therefore, I must form an alliance with you and obtain land from you in a fair and cooperative manner. Since it is a cooperative relationship, I must demonstrate my workability to you. Catching these neighboring monarchs who are taking advantage of me is just a spur of the moment at the negotiation table. Later, I have a bigger fish to kill. I have a feeling that this big fish is about to take the bait. Chapter 282, Chasing the Tiger and Devouring the Wolf. The big fish Loki was talking about wasn't Prince Lancelot or Egbert, King of Wessex. It was the Viking king of Sullivan. Ever since he captured the Holy Mountain and seized the Asgard portal last autumn, he knew a battle between him and Eivor would be inevitable. There was only one Asgard portal, and it was the Vikings' most important strategic resource. Barely one. Loki pondered for a long time how to eliminate Eivor. Ultimately, he concluded that he had to rely on the English. After all, there was nothing more satisfying than driving one enemy to attack another. After he took the king and the prince hostage back to Sea-Watch Fortress, he knew the initiative in the war was once again in his hands. During this long 14-day wait, he neither initiated negotiations nor took any action. None of the nobles of the 7 kingdoms of England knew what he was planning. Only he knew, he was waiting for Eivor to launch his army first. With so many hostages in Sea-Watch, the coalition forces dared not take destructive actions like polluting the water supply or forcing a siege. Loki could survive for a long time on the city's stored food. The English coalition forces outside could also rely on the 7 kingdoms' extensive trade network to continuously purchase rations from the French duchy across the English Channel, providing a steady supply. However, the saber-toothed mercenaries, aboard longships, now hidden in an unknown bay, had very limited supplies. And transporting food by sea was simply unrealistic. O'Sullivan had been waiting for an opportunity to seize advantage. He planned to wait until Loki and the English went to war, then rush in as reinforcements to reap the rewards. It was a good idea, but Loki had already seen through his plan. He and the English coalition stared blankly inside and outside Sea-Watch, entering a long, drawn-out battle. Now, Eivor on the coast had 2 options. 1. Deplete the food supply and immediately turn back to the conqueror's fortress. Based on Loki's understanding of Eivor, he would most likely not make this decision. Regardless of the safety of the North Sea at this point, if he returned, regardless of whether Loki or the English coalition won the battle, he would bid farewell to the Asgard portal forever. And he couldn't afford to lose the portal key. Second, attack. If he wanted to attack, he had to be fast. The slender Viking longships were designed like canoes. They lacked ample space for emergency transportation, and once all crews were aboard, there was very little room for food. In such situations, Vikings excelled at plundering to solve their food shortages. However, it was early spring in the English Isles. After a long winter, every household had little food left. A small amount of food was collected at Sea-Watch Fortress in preparation for the attack on the Viking navy at sea, and the rest was sown in the fields. Even if they plundered locally, their gains would be quite limited. If Eivor's troops were to survive, they had to attack the city and open the Lord's granary. Loki was waiting for Eivor's opportunity to launch the first attack. Just as he had predicted before the battle, in a 3-way melee, the last side to join the fray would have the best advantage. He was now entrenched in Sea-Watch Fortress, holding a group of English lords and nobles as hostages. He could, if he chose, fight the English coalition to the bitter end. But Ivar couldn't. He had no food. And couldn't launch large-scale raids. He simply couldn't afford to wait. If Ivar attacked the English coalition forces first, and the English and Ivar engaged in a fight, Loki would be the one waiting in the wings. The initiative in the war would shift dramatically into his hands. Old man, I've said it before, I'm the aggressor, but I'm not your enemy. Since we will be neighbors, I must eliminate all potential threats. Now, I've created a rare opportunity, allowing our two powerful enemies to attrition each other first, chasing the tiger to devour the wolf. That's how a wise man wins a war. Ulysses looked at him, his eyes gleaming. People often say that those born from the turbulence of time and space harbor ideas that are incompatible with this era. Each of them is like a firework exploding in the night sky, bringing only a moment of prosperity to their tribe before being instantly lost in the long river of time. It's you, however, who actually terrifies me. Ulysses had lived to over 70 years, and he had a clear understanding of most political games in the world. He had never seen someone as impeccable as Loki. This man invaded this continent as an invader, yet presented an attitude of servitude to him, the king. Yet, he had brought forth enough leverage to draw his attention. In both combat and political prowess, he was 100 times more powerful than his younger brother, Prince Lancelot. Such a capable commander capable of fighting tough battles was indeed what the kingdom of Mercia desperately needed. However, no matter how the word war was glamorized, it was always the common people who suffered. The Viking warlord also made an explanation to the people. After capturing Sea-Watch Fortress, he opened the gates and released all its inhabitants. The choice then fell to the people. If they chose to continue to obey Prince Lancelot's call and rebel against this benevolent Viking lord, they would have no reason to blame themselves for sacrificing their lives on this very land. Using this as an excuse, Loki lured another threat, Saber-Tooth O'Sullivan, to this continent. If he could eliminate the Viking king, the invader had been reserved and accountable to both the lord and the people. It was a three birds with one stone move. How could such a terrifying person exist? Could he really be the god from Valhalla? Allah stroked his beard and cast a pitying glance at his daughter. Finally, he spoke slowly. The wheel of fate has begun to turn. No one can predict the final outcome of this war. If the situation inevitably deteriorates, I only hope you can give my daughter a chance to survive. Loki looked at the girl in white. Since entering the castle, Elizabeth has been treating patients and saving lives daily, displaying a composure far beyond her years. This worries Loki. After all, this girl is only 17. She spends her days navigating the midst of ferocious Vikings, unconcerned about these vicious men slaughtering her own people. Where does she find such composure? People are always afraid of things they cannot understand. Loki still doesn't know the answer to this question. He can only take things one step at a time. The three of them clasped their hands together and said the pre-meal prayers of the Holy Fathers. Then, Allah broke open his baguette. Just as he placed the bread on Loki's plate, a heavy, muffled thunder rumbled from the horizon. Chapter 283, Powerful Saber-Tooth Mercenaries. Able to sit firmly on the throne of Viking King and rule the land, Ivar O'Sullivan was no mere casualty. In land battles, Hummel, with only 500 Viking shield axemen from Blooddove, was able to crush Mercia with bloodshed, demonstrating the vulnerability of English ground forces to the chosen of Valhalla. However, this time, Ivar brought not 500 men, but 500 longships. From these longships emerged 8,000 saber-toothed mercenaries. On April 10, Ivar landed on the soft sands of Northumbria. That afternoon, he marched quickly to Yorkshire, capturing the city in just half a day. 10,000 Viking warriors rushed into the city, leaving Yorkshire devastated and few survivors. After plundering Yorkshire for sufficient food, Ivar decisively marched south to Mercia to encircle Loki. However, at the Northumbrian-Mercian border, he encountered stiff resistance from the English coalition. The main force of the English coalition marched out in full force. They fielded nearly 30,000 ground troops, including 3,000 heavy cavalry, 5,000 crossbowmen, 10,000 spearmen, and a large reserve force. In addition to the ground forces, the Sornmoen Knights also made their appearance. Wessex even sent 3 dragon riders in an attempt to crush the Viking king's forces in one fell swoop. However, while the idea was beautiful, the reality was brutal. Ivar's ability to sell the saber-tooth mercenaries throughout the western continent, and to maintain a constant supply shortage, was due not only to the exceptional strength of the chosen of Valhalla, but also to the scientific and standardized training of the mercenaries. Raised in Constantinople, the most prosperous city in the Western continent, Ever had been exposed to the world's military forces from a young age. The saber-tooth mercenaries' greatest selling point was their omnipotence. Whether wielding a great axe in close combat, shooting with a bow, or even slashing on horseback, manipulating giant crossbows, the saber-tooth mercenaries, after long training in the conqueror's fortress, mastered the art with absolute mastery. Therefore, after being sold to various lords, they were tasked with any mission involving killing, whether flying or swimming, hiding behind high walls, or riding on horseback. The fearless saber-tooth mercenaries never earned a negative reputation. Facing the English spear formation with their steel spears raised high, the Viking warriors didn't hesitate. The sea giants in the front row charged into the formation, heavy shields raised high, while the berserkers in the back row stepped on their shoulders and leaped from the air. Once inside the enemy formation, they swung their arms, instantly creating a whirlwind of blood and flesh, slaughtering like grass. As the two armies clashed, the crossbowmen in the back row also worked tirelessly. The chosen ones of the Thunder God's path channeled Odin's divine power into their massive crossbows, firing one lightning bolt after another into the sky. When the bolts reached a critical mass, even dragons would evade them, let alone the nearly defenseless Moa knights. After the saber-tooth mercenaries formed a wedge-shaped assault formation and launched their charge, the battle lasted only a morning before the English coalition forces were scattered under the onslaught of the saber-tooth mercenaries. The weakness of the Holy Lord's followers under the Holy Bishop was only one factor, another was the age-old problem. The disunity of the Seven Nations coalition. Seeing their soldiers falling like wheat, the generals of the Seven Nations instinctively led their troops in a rout. I don't need to run fast, I just need to outrun my allies. That way, when the Vikings slaughter our allies, I can run farther. Almost every general thought this way. After all, the Viking invasion was temporary, but as long as the seven kingdoms of the English Isles remain ununited, constant friction and petty wars will persist. Survival in this land requires an army. Surrounded by wolves, a single misstep could lead to the loss of lands painstakingly built by generations of ancestors. Reclaiming them would be a matter of years. The first to lead the retreat from the battlefield were the Dragon Riders of Wessex. There were only 10 Dragon Riders in all of Wessex, and after 3 deaths last year, they could no longer afford to lose any more. Amidst the barrage of nearly 2,000 crossbowmen and a handful of Thundergod path sequencers, a dragon might be able to withstand the intense fire of nearly 2,000 crossbowmen and a handful of Thundergod path sequencers, but a dragon rider would be extremely vulnerable to the barrage of arrows. Raising a dragon is easy, but training a dragon rider capable of defeating it and mounting its back from the fragile ranks of the holy bishops is incredibly difficult. As the mighty thunderbolts rained down from the sky and a hail of arrows began to rain down from the Viking ranks, the leading dragon rider leader immediately ordered a retreat. As the dragon withdrew, the Mercian cavalry, waiting in the rear, sensed something was amiss. Throughout the operation, Mercian generals harbored considerable resentment towards the coalition forces. In every joint engagement, Mercia had paid the most but gained the least. During this summer's battle, even their king had fallen into the hands of a Viking lord, yet the coalition forces were still considering polluting the water supply to Sea-Watch, completely ignoring the Mercian king as a ruler deserving equal treatment. The cavalry commander, already filled with resentment, saw the dragon retreat from the battlefield and, with a decisive wave of his hand, 5,000 Mercian heavy cavalry turned their horses and withdrew immediately. The English coalition forces that followed were like a gradually crumbling tower. After the cavalry retreated, the archers were next in line, followed by the reserves. Finally, even the heavy infantry phalanxes, the backbone of the resistance against the giants' charge, began to flee. The English coalition was inevitably on the verge of collapse. No one could escape unscathed with their backs against the Vikings. In just one morning, the vast, newly sown fields were swarming with soldiers, their armor discarded, fleeing for their lives. Like fleeing rats, they sought any possible hiding spot. But the saber-tooth mercenaries had neither the time nor the inclination to engage in a cat-and-mouse game. Whether in the woods, the farms, or even the newly sprouted orchards, the saber-tooth mercenaries had only one response: douse them with fuel and set them ablaze. Countless soldiers who had taken refuge in homes, along with innocent residents, were reduced to ashes by the saber-tooth mercenaries. Ever's march, however, remained undeterred. In just 3 days, his army had advanced all the way to Salter, home to the fortress of Sea-Watch. Along the way, he slaughtered every English deserter, along with every civilian in his path. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Elizabeth's Decision. Loki stood atop the walls of Sea-Watch Fortress, gazing at the smoke rising from the distant horizon. He had anticipated the immense strength of Ivar's private army, but he hadn't anticipated the saber-toothed mercenaries' ease in crushing the English coalition as easily as crushing rock against eggshells. Since his time travel, from the defense of Hanshu village to the Slavic invasion, Loki had fought numerous battles, but none had involved more than 1,000 men. Westerners couldn't depict the war scenes depicted in stories like Records of the Grand Historian and Romance of the Three Kingdoms because they simply couldn't comprehend a war involving over 100,000 men. Take the renowned Greco-Persian Wars, Greece versus Persia, a magnificent conflict woven into countless legends and sung by bards for millennia. The total number of Greek troops: 10,000. In 300, the seemingly boundless Persian army, surging from sea and land, actually numbered 50,000, a formidable force in Western eyes. At the same time, the Battle of Changping, fought between the states of Zhao and Qin in China, resulted in the massacre of 450,000 surrendered soldiers. Bai Qi dug a pit large enough to fit 9 Persian armies. Compared to this grand spectacle, every battle Loki had fought since his time travel could be described as a village brawl. Only now, with a nation ablaze beneath the iron hoof, did he finally witness the cruel truth behind the word war. He knew that behind the thick smoke, countless children and defenseless women perished in the flames. Freshly planted crops were burned, and countless more would starve to death in the ensuing winter. A general's success is eternal, these 7 seemingly insignificant words from history books. Yet, when he personally conquered a nation, how many more innocent civilians died on his march? Loki gazed upon the scene with indifference, just as he had gazed upon the blazing flames of Valhalla last summer. Winning a war ultimately means casualties. As a pawn in troubled times, compassion and soft-heartedness are poisons on the road to hegemony. If the people want to live and work in peace and prosperity, believers in Machiavelli must end the war with a swift and decisive hand. Only by pursuing unification by any means necessary can lasting peace be achieved. Now, he has joined the ranks of those vying for hegemony. On this impasse, there is no other choice. With a long, desolate sigh, he descended from the city wall, and all the Viking soldiers along the way saluted respectfully. They had imagined breaking through the British defenses with their own flesh and blood. However, no one could have imagined that Loki would attract powerful reinforcements from across the North Sea. At Ivar's current pace, he would likely reach the walls of Sea-Watch by this afternoon. Loki himself, without a single soldier, lifted the siege. As he walked back to his bedroom, the fiery red ocean had already gradually sunk below sea level. Servants carrying torches moved through the Sea-Watch fortress, illuminating the dark passageways. Amidst the interplay of light and shadow, he reached his bedroom door, only to find it ajar. He gently pushed it open, and a warm fireplace blazed brightly. Standing beside it was indeed the Mercian princess, Elizabeth Ella. The firelight reflected on her fair face, bringing a touch of melancholy to this girl who always radiated a holy radiance. Only then did Loki notice how lightly she was dressed. On the chilly early spring evening, she wore only a close-fitting silk apron, revealing a large expanse of her snow-white back. Elizabeth was not the mature, glamorous socialite like the Viking princess Marandine O'Sullivan. Unlike the aggressive and possessive Viking princesses, her character possessed a certain gentleness and softness, characteristic of the East continent. Inside Sea-Watch, she cared for all wounded soldiers she encountered, Viking and English alike. On one hand, her youthful 17-year-old self was evident. On the other, her almost constant exuding of maternal instincts made the English girl appear both youthful and mature, both saintly and sweet. Loki was no saint, and in Storm's End, he hadn't rejected the Viking princess's advances. Yet, compared to the Viking princess, who had fought tooth and nail to survive the murky world of Constantinople politics, the Mercian princess, like a solitary orchid in a valley, was undoubtedly more endearing. Yet, at that moment, he forgot a crucial point. Any woman draped in a thin piece of fabric in a man's room must have ulterior motives. And the Mercian princess, in this case, was plotting his life. Demon, This wolf in sheep's clothing is the most sinister demon I've ever seen in my life, bar none. How could he do such a thing to the people of Mercia? Elizabeth would never forget what she saw today as she climbed the city walls, a Mercian kingdom engulfed in smoke and flames. Amidst the flames that burned half the sky red, she could smell the acrid scent of gunpowder in the air. And she could hear the cries of countless innocent souls. Last summer, the Hummel blood pigeons, like a swarm of iron locusts, had already shattered the girl's concept of cruelty. But now, when she saw Ivar's army, she finally understood that the 500 men of the previous summer were merely the thunder before the approaching storm clouds. The real rainstorm had only now begun to unfold before her eyes. Elizabeth, a lifelong believer in the holy light, was no slut. Yet, now, standing naked in Loki's room, she had to do her utmost to pique the Viking lord's interest. I must kill this demon. Everything we've suffered this summer is due to him. If he were still alive, how much more blood and gore would have raged across the lands of Mercia. Only with his death can this war end quickly. Watching the Viking lord approaching her, the girl's breathing quickened, and her fair skin began to tremble uncontrollably. To lure the demon closer to her tonight, she had even shaved her entire body hair, a rare feat. Her marble white skin seemed warm and soft in the firelight. As Loki approached, the girl skillfully wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Meanwhile, Loki was a bit bewildered by the enchanting scene unfolding before him. Unlike the well-versed Viking princess, the girl before him, breathing heavily and tense, was clearly a novice. By luring him with this gesture, Loki naively assumed she was probably trying to get him to avoid her poor father. With a long sigh, he gently grasped the girl's warm arm, just about to free himself from her embrace. However, behind his back, Elizabeth's hand had already appeared without him noticing, a sky thunder flashing with blazing holy light. Chapter 285 The Bloody Creator appears. This was the first time Loki had witnessed such a miraculous spell capable of creating something out of thin air. As a time traveler, it would be a lie to say he wasn't surprised. He watched helplessly as the ball of light, held in his hand, thrust towards him, unable to dodge or block. The holy light was blazing and warm, but the lightning piercing his skin felt cold and real. Crimson blood gushed from shattered veins, pooling on Loki's body before falling silently to the ground. In that instant, a sea of crimson washed over him, and then, a faint crimson mist suddenly formed around the two of them. Loki secretly thought, oh no, after drinking the golden potion and successfully awakening the bloodline of the ancestors of the Sterrig family, the divine power of the Crimson Apostle within him had been greatly suppressed. Even so, this body, forged by the Crimson Creator, still retained some of its functions. Even wounded or bleeding, he could still create that terrifying blood mist illusion. Once within it, the three powerful Crimson Creators, Lord Raphael, Emperor Firefly, and Shadow Demon, would be able to break through the barriers of time and space and pull him back into the petri dish. Once back in the petri dish, everything would be over. Even seeking death would be a luxury. Drops of blood dripped onto the ground, evaporating into pale red mist. Loki's first reaction wasn't to attack the girl beside him. He clenched his right fist, roared, and smashed it against the nearby windowsill. The exquisite Byzantine glass windows shattered, allowing the cold air outside to pour into the room. 2 years prior, during the defense of Frostwater Village, Sweyn Gynck had already discovered a way to combat the Crimson Apostles, destroy the walls, allowing the cold wind to disperse the blood mist. Without the protection of the blood mist, the chosen ones under the Crimson Creator would lose 90% of their power. However, Loki ultimately underestimated the Mercian princess's abilities. With one successful strike, the dagger, condensed from holy light, swiftly transformed into a long-handled broadsword amidst the girl's prayers. Watching helplessly as a ball of scorching holy light suddenly exploded from the center of the room, Loki had no time to dodge. The long-handled machete slashed at his shoulder. More blood began to gush out. Fuck, Loki understood the Mercian princess's desire to kill him, but now was hardly the time to comfort a grieving girl. With a furious roar, he snatched a longsword from the princess's hand, then grasped her by the waist and pushed her from the room. Run to the roof immediately and find your father. Use your powers to break down the door and run. With these last two words, he slammed the door shut and reached for the blood axe hanging from the wall. The penetrating wound inflicted by the blade of light could not heal quickly, and blood gushed uncontrollably to the ground. The blood mist began to spread at a visible speed. Amidst the crimson mist, a massive hand suddenly appeared. The Crimson Creator had descended into this world through the blood mist illusion. The blood mist's coverage wasn't very extensive, so only a hand appeared before Loki. But it was a massive hand. 5 enormous fingers, about half a meter in diameter, ruthlessly crushed the rubble and furniture in the room, reaching out to grab him. Facing the giant hand, Loki showed no fear. He roared in fury. Then raised his blood axe and chopped it down. This was Loki's first confrontation with the mighty blood creator since his rebirth. The indestructible blood axe within the blood mist illusion struck the massive fingers, severing them with a smooth motion. Unexpectedly, from the severed fingers, a blood mist gushed out like a waterfall. The thin blood mist in the room instantly became nearly pitch black. At the same time, the surging spiritual energy within the illusion was enough to sustain another portion of the blood creator's body. Loki could feel the initial movement of a single giant hand, beginning at his wrist. It quickly spread outward, spreading across his arm and chest. The blood-red body of the creator appeared out of thin air, shattering the wall of Sea-Watch Fortress. Vast rubble began to fall from the walls. Viking warriors emerged from their bedrooms, only to be met by the half-formed body of an ancient god dangling from the walls. It was a terrifying giant, over 100 meters tall. "Command all troops. Open the gates, all warriors from the river valley. Break out through the gates," Loki roared furiously through the bloody mist. According to the established tactic, the river valley Vikings should have waited for the saber-toothed mercenaries to help them break the siege surrounding Sea-Watch Fortress. But now, Sea-Watch Fortress could no longer remain. He knew that a rash attack would result in the deaths of many of his companions under the layers of trenches and crossbows. However, compared to the blood mist now spreading through the city, and the blood creator about to emerge in his full form within the blood mist illusion, even the sea of fire and swords outside the city was far safer than inside. The blood mist still didn't cover a wide area. This left only a sliver of the blood creator's chest and one arm, nearly 100 meters tall, visible. Even so, the mighty old god was no match for Loki at this moment. He swung his axe left and right, carving through the walls as he fought his way through, allowing the seemingly tangible blood mist to dissipate in the evening breeze. But when it rained, it rained. Tonight, the seashore was calm and windless. Inside the castle, Loki, axe in hand, ran towards the penthouse. As he ran, he could feel the blood creator's massive hand behind him. In its path, the solid stone of the fortress crumbled like tofu. As the blood mist continued to spread, the lower half of the bloody creator's body and half of his thigh emerged from within. Damn it! When fighting the bloody creator's lineage, you simply can't let these beasts bleed. I've been a Crimson Apostle for so long. I should know this. A mortal's blood, no matter how much, can only flow, unless they are on the battlefield. At the very beginning of the battle, Loki's biggest mistake was severing a giant's finger with his bloody axe. A waterfall of blood mist gushed out, now nearly filling half the castle. Sheathing his axe, Loki ran, not daring to inflict another wound on the giant hand behind him. With his bloodline suppressed, the Crimson Apostle had lost the ability to enter the void state while running. In his desperate run, the giant hand quickly shattered the sturdy castle. With a resounding bang, he leaped over the city wall like a cannonball shattering glass. "Everyone, leave this castle immediately," Loki roared, not daring to pause, not even to look back. While the windless night couldn't disperse the blood mist, it couldn't spread beyond Hohenheim Fortress either. The most urgent task was to evacuate everyone from the fortress immediately. Without bodies inside, the blood mist illusion would lack the raw material to continue expanding. If the blood mist illusion expanded again, and the entire body of the bloody creator descended upon the human world, forget about destroying 6,000 Vikings. If the blood mist illusion was vast enough, they could easily flatten the entire kingdom of Mercia. Chapter 286 Backhand. Egbert was a very lucky man. His life was filled with unwavering luck. Before his birth, his mother, Margaret of Dragonfly Island, was not the king's favorite concubine. Within the Wessex court, neither her family nor her appearance was considered prestigious. However, just 2 months after Egbert's birth, a plague suddenly broke out within the Wessex court, killing nearly half of the concubines, eunuchs, and favorites, including the king's queen, as well as the first, second, third, and fourth heirs. When the kingdom of Wessex regained order after this catastrophe, the king was surprised to discover that all the surviving princes were either fools or homosexuals. Only Egbert seemed to be a normal person. Thus, Egbert was transformed into the heir apparent, inheriting the Griffin family crest. He became the crown prince, and his life trajectory was forever rewritten. According to ancient Roman custom, princes were required to travel on their 18th birthday. This allowed them to step outside the palace, personally interact with the people, and understand the realities of life within the kingdom. On the other hand, they tempered themselves, emulating the legendary knights and heroes hailed from the troubadours, journeying deep into the uninhabited mountains to complete legendary adventures. For princes of other kingdoms, the coming-of-age trials were merely a formality. Along the way, they would stay in luxurious inns, surrounded by servants and guards, treat every traveler they encountered to drinks, and seduce every young maiden along the way. As for the prince's adventure stories, some were rewritten and retold by impoverished bookmakers and bards. With enough silver, they could easily spin fantastical tales like reaching the moon in the sky, catching turtles in the 5 oceans. The common people outside the city didn't need to know about the prince's legends, they simply read them to the amorous maidens in the palace. Since these maidens would never leave the palace anyway, they would read whatever the bookmakers wrote. But Egbert was different. He embarked on a true adventure, alone and with a sword. No one knew where he went after leaving the imperial city, nor did anyone know what he had endured along the way. 3 years later, when he returned, he was accompanied by 7 women dressed in red. Leading them was Iphitus Bloodstained, later known as the Red Queen. The commonly accepted story within Wessex about these 7 individuals was that Prince Egbert had entered an ancient ruin and awakened 7 gods from ancient times. Iphitus and the 6 identical female warriors behind him were all ancient gods, separate from human society. Each possessed devastating power. When Egbert was 21, the mythical legend passed down by word of mouth was confirmed. In 788 AD, due to a serious disagreement over tariffs, the previous king of Kent, Albrecht, instructed the Archbishop of Canterbury to secretly launch a military coup within Southampton, the capital of Wessex. Under the instigation of the supreme evangelist, the Grand Master of the Imperial Guard, Windsor, and his 3,000 guardsmen suddenly imprisoned the old king and imposed martial law in the capital, Southampton, cutting off all military access to the city gates. That night, Windsor believed that the Wessex royal family, without an army or warriors, would be as docile as lambs. However, when a boundless crimson mist drifted from the imperial city, he knew he was wrong. He was terribly wrong. In the pitch black, thick mist, the 3,000 guardsmen could see neither their companions nor their enemies. They could only hear the shrieks of agony. From the start of the slaughter to the final, trembling soldiers' suicide within the mist, the entire battle did not even last until the next morning. When the mist dissipated, only 3,000 skeletons remained within the palace, all flesh and blood entwined. After this battle, the old king sighed deeply and abdicated. At just 21 years old, Egbert ascended the throne. He knew that everything he possessed was inseparable from Iphitus, the Red Queen discovered in the ancient city. Therefore, wherever he went, he brought his crimson apostles with him. "My king, I thought you were born lucky, but I didn't expect this kid named Loki Sterrig to be even luckier than me. If we hadn't happened to have left Fisher Farm when we raided it, he'd probably be wailing in agony at the hands of King Raphael. In over 70 years of life, I've never seen a mortal resist the might of the Scarlet Creator. You know, in this starry sky, no race is more adept at adapting their bodies to their environments than the Scarlet Creator." Iphitus stood at the tall porthole, gazing into the sky as it gradually turned pale. "I sensed the emergence of a blood mist illusion. I even sensed my race's powerful god king attempting to evade obstacles through time and space, forcing his way upon this land, my king. If we choose to dispatch our forces now, and if we can capture Loki, King Raphael and the Fire Emperor will grant me supreme divine power. I will even qualify as a divine messenger, serving the god kings forever." Egbert remained on his warm bed. He gazed at the slender waistline of Iphitus, his mind reminiscing about a meeting with the Viking king of O'Sullivan 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they had attended the coming-of-age ceremony of the French crown prince, François Plantagenet. The wealthy Plantagenet family had invited all the royal families surrounding the Mediterranean continent, and the one who most impressed Egbert was Ivor O'Sullivan, hailing from a bitterly cold land. In the opulent Grand Palais of Paris, he dressed in a silk gown and engaged in cordial conversation with all the envoys, speaking 7 languages with equal grace. During the banquet, Egbert was astonished to discover that among the princes and nobles of the western continent, Ivor's reputation far surpassed even his own, the Lord of Wessex. Everyone looked at him with smiles, like a familiar friend who hadn't seen each other for years. This incident completely shattered the northern Viking stereotype of ever. Recalling the joint invasion last autumn, when the 3 dragon riders seemed to have vanished into thin air, even the Zoroastrian intelligence agents couldn't explain how his dragons had perished. His instincts told him that both Eivor and Loki were formidable. Now, with their forces now united and their defenses breached, launching an offensive against them would be utterly foolish. The 2 previously feuding Viking lords would be forced to unite under the threat of a foreign invasion. And if they united, the consequences would be far more than the scarlet apostles around him could handle. "My dear lady," Egbert rolled out of bed, pulling a silk gown onto his body. "In the conflicts of human society, oftentimes, we don't need to personally resolve our enemies. Let one enemy eliminate another. Let our rivals slaughter each other, and let civil strife ensue. This is the proper way for nations to get along, so, I think it's time for our old friend Hummel Blood Pigeon to make his presence felt." Chapter 287, The Destruction of the Blood Pigeon Clan, 1. Egbert responded to Hummel Blood Pigeon's request precisely for this moment. The perceptive king of Wessex had long recognized that old Hummel was a ruthless warrior. Though he had led his men from their homeland, he would never resign himself to defeat in the Viking struggle. He would seek a way back at the table at any opportunity. And now was the time to deploy this mad dog. Right now, Eivor's saber-toothed mercenaries are advancing with unstoppable force. Our shaky coalition is powerless to stop them. If he and Loki unite in our encirclement, the war will only become more difficult, but, if their rear is lost now, the outcome will be very different. Slowly approaching Iphitus's rear, Egbert reached out and embraced her warm skin. In today's human world, few monarchs could find an outer god's messenger. Even fewer could secure one. The proud king of Wessex relished a feeling of control. Hummel Blood Pigeon is an incurable opportunist. He can't afford to offend the Viking king, but he can afford to offend Loki, a small nobleman of the same origin. This old guy runs his own intelligence network. Through this intelligence network, he must have known that Loki and the Viking king are just like us, with a superficial unity but a deep disunity, fighting each other. And at this moment, as long as he takes over Loki's hometown, the Viking coalition will immediately fall into a state of collapse. Only then will we have the opportunity to strike. Defeating the enemy in one fell swoop when they are in panic and anxiety, this is the war between humans. Red Queen Iphitus Bloodkin slightly opened her pale red eyes and looked back at Egbert, burying her whole body in his arms. "My king, don't you get bored of filing your head with hypocritical conspiracies every day? As divine messengers, we are supposed to stand before our enemies openly, under the gaze of the gods of the sky, rip off their heads, and then respectfully present them to the God King, spreading fear as what saints do, and it's the most convenient way to gain power from the God King." Egbert caressed the woman's skin in his arms, remaining silent for a long time. True, he needed the power of the Red Queen and her Crimson Apostles. But at the same time, he was also a human, raised in a bishop's church school, with 99% of his friends and relatives being believers. He knew that Iphitus and his Crimson Apostles were all heretics in the eyes of the Inquisition. These ancient gods, who had existed since ancient times, had never shown any mercy to humans. They simply did not regard humans as intelligent beings to be treated equally. After ascending to power, even he was inseparable from the Red Queen. Egbert has been relentlessly developing Wessex's own national strength. He diligently governs the country, enriches the nation, and strengthens its military. He even supports a large number of mercenary leaders, such as Flyer Thorhart, who travel the world in search of old god relics. He can use these messengers of the old gods, but he will not rely on them, nor will he willingly become servants at the god's mercy. Granted, sending the Red Queen and Crimson Apostle into battle could quickly eliminate all his enemies. But unless the situation is desperate, he will not use these outer gods in a mortal war. Mortals and gods have no right to negotiate. The price he will pay in the future, accumulated over time, could very well be his life, or even his soul. 3 days later, Hummel Blood Pigeon set sail into the warm spring breeze. To ensure he could inflict a crushing defeat on the Vikings across the Channel, Egbert allocated an additional 2,000 free knights from the Visigothic free cities, 400 sailors, and 50 warships to his existing 500-man private army. This army, built with gold pounds, was even more powerful than Duke Bernard's entire army combined. Old Hummel burst into laughter. In his entire life, he had never been so wealthy as he was today. After all, he had lived half his life in Scandinavia, and he had no friends. If he could vanquish the remnants of Loki's power from the river valley, relying on his allies in Wolf Creek and the Bay, and the support of the O'Sullivan family, he could secure his position as Duke of the River Valley. Amidst a priest's devout prayers, Old Hummel's vast army set sail from the coastline of Wessex. Aboard 50 warships, Vikings, Visigoths, French, English, pirates and free knights from countless nations, drank spirits and sang merry songs. Despite their differing languages, everyone knew they were attacking an empty, undefended city. The thought of its delicate women and warehouses overflowing with gold and silver filled them with uncontrollable excitement. Under the warm spring breeze and the blazing sun, the 50 warships vanished into the shimmering waters. That was the last the English saw of them. For a full fortnight, not a sound was heard from the other side of the North Sea. 50 brand new warships, nearly 3,000 fully armed soldiers, this fleet, dancing and singing, sailed towards a land of peace, like entering the jaws of a great beast. No one survived. Egbert was overcome by a profound sense of unreality. The North Sea in early spring was calm and clear. For a fortnight, not even a major storm, let alone a storm, had stirred upon the North Sea surface. Hummel Blood Pigeon, the Viking seafarer, was a veteran who had sailed the seas his entire life. He doubted such a veteran captain would encounter trouble on calm waters. Could they possibly be killed by the elderly, weak, women, and children guarding the river valley after landing? That was unrealistic. The Visigoths were less a kingdom than a loose collection of city-states descended from ancient Rome. These city-states shared a common currency, had no tariffs, and rarely engaged in large-scale wars. Most men born there were free knights, traveling between city-states like mercenaries, serving different lords. They encountered the vastly different religious beliefs of each city-state and joined numerous warrior guilds, honing their unique combat skills. While their reputation might not align with that of the saber-toothed mercenaries, the free knights of the free cities were no pushovers. A force of 2,000 free knights was enough to annihilate even small city-states. What on earth had befallen them in the river valley that they melted away on that empty coastline without even sending out their ravens? Note, the Visigothic region was what would later become Spain. Chapter 288, The Destruction of the Blood Pigeon Clan, 2. 14 days ago, in the valley, at Storm's End. Jerome gazed at the dozen or so figures bound before him, and couldn't help but think back to that strange winter day 3 months ago. That night, more than 20 ordinary civilians within Storm's End left their beds in the dead of night, vanishing silently into the freezing cold. They hadn't been seen since. And today, something equally bizarre had happened again. Upon waking, 3,000 more attackers lay gruesomely dead in the open woods outside Storm's End. Their footprints suggested they had emerged from the nearby reefs around dusk and then marched rapidly to the outskirts of Storm's End. Some soldiers camped outside the castle, while others, restless, prepared to storm Storm's End before dawn, after a brief meal. However, they were attacked by an unknown monster. Unlike the Tang Dynasty sword cultivators who wielded flying swords and slaughtered with ease, this monster's methods were markedly more brutal. All the dead fell to the ground, their corpses reduced to nothing more than a thin layer of human skin. All the blood, tissue, and even the bones and muscles had been drained from their bodies, leaving them dehydrated like sand. As the sun rose, the winged guards discovered the campsite. Countless dried human skins were blown across the ground by the dry spring breeze, like dead leaves. Most of the winged guards remaining in Storm's End were new recruits, uninitiated by the bloody battles. The apocalyptic scene before them sent chills to their spines. By the time Winged Guards Commander Katya arrived with a main force, a significant portion of the dried human skin had already been blown like fallen leaves into the nearby river. Upon contact with the water, the dried, moisture-free skin rapidly disintegrated, stained the entire river an eerie, pitch-black hue. The camp itself wasn't entirely devoid of life. The few survivors, bound with thick ropes, lay unconscious in the center. They now stood before Jerome. Mr. Jerome, we have met before, haha. I didn't expect that you have reached this position now. It seems that the kid from the Sterig family treats you well. All the warriors who have followed him and fought with swords have finally been rewarded. He is really the light of my Vikings. Although old man Hummel was still tied up with ropes, it did not prevent him from speaking eloquently. You won't forget that in that cold winter 2 years ago, my daughter-in-law, Siren Green, was in Duke Loki's army. This is proof of the alliance between my blood pigeon town and Coldwater village, and at the final moment of the battle, Don't forget who is the one who finally entered the battlefield to eliminate Grandpa Gunk's slave army for you. It was me. It was Hummel Blood Pigeon from Blood Pigeon Town. Without my daughter-in-law using the newly established intelligence network to tip you off, would you have had time to prepare? Without us sending troops, could you have survived that war, Mr. Jerome? In this icy Jedi, no one can survive alone without friends. You don't think that I'm leading my soldiers this time to invade you? No one would think so. I'm old. I can't withstand bloody battles anymore. So, I just spent a peaceful winter in the warm Free City state. This spring, I plan to lead the free knights I've just met back to Blood Pigeon Town to swear allegiance to our new lord, yet last night, for unknown reasons, we were attacked by a horde of monsters. If it weren't for my brother's valiant resistance, the monsters might have stormed Storm's End in the dead of night. Lord Jerome, you are a saint of the Holy Lord Christ. I believe you will surely treat our wronged friends fairly. It must be said that amid the old man's tearful accusations, many villagers from Coldwater Village did indeed look at him with sympathy. Despite their barbaric and cruel nature, the Vikings were always willing to help those who needed them, never showing the slightest disrespect. 2 years ago, in the cold winter, Swangwink's final wave consisted of 200 Slavic slaves. When these slaves stormed Coldwater Village, Loki fell unconscious and Jerome was exhausted. The Coldwater defenders were truly at their last gasp. The honest Vikings were completely unaware that it was Old Man Hummel who was plundering the fruits of their victory. They genuinely regarded him as their savior. Jerome, however, remained silent, deep in thought. While Loki led his troops away on the campaign, he had once again shouldered the responsibility of maintaining the rear. After years of managing the village, having weathered countless changes and unexpected events, the 30-year-old holy bishop was no longer the honest scribe he once was. While many of Old Man Hummel's words seemed reasonable, they couldn't disguise the sheer irrationality of his late-night landing and attempt to set up camp near the city. If he truly had come to join the Lord, he could simply hoist the Blood Dove Town flag on his ship's bow and sail into Storm's End harbor. Why would he land on such a rocky shoal? Only pirates out foraging would choose such a landing. Such rocky shoals would never be approached by any inhabitants without permission. His actions after landing were even more outrageous. He worked tirelessly upon landing, launching a surprise attack in the darkness of night, a wolf-hunting-like fighting method clearly only an elderly Viking lord could employ. This was undoubtedly a Viking raid. Jerome had no idea who had ambushed them, or what creature had drained them of their dried skin. Having spent over a decade copying books at the Holy Bishops, he had also traveled extensively with his teacher, the Saint Euthybius. Ancient texts claim that only monsters born in the water-scarce black desert of the northern continent could evolve a fighting style that drained human flesh and blood. However, Scandinavia is surrounded by the sea, its islands dotted with rivers and trees. Such thirsty monsters are simply impossible in such an environment. What could have attacked them? Loki could safely leave the rearguard in Jerome's care, precisely because he was a devout member of the Holy Bishop's faith. He treated all his followers within his jurisdiction as his own family, and he cared deeply for their children's safety, food, clothing, and shelter. Compared to Old Man Hummel, who was currently bound in the hall, he was even more wary of the dangers of suddenly appearing outside Storm's End. In extreme turmoil, he knitted his brows and delivered his final verdict. Master Hummel, we're not fools, and we all know your purpose, but considering your undoubted service to Duke Loki and the people of the Vale, I'm offering you and your family a chance to live. I will imprison you in the dungeons of Storm's End for now. Wait for Duke Loki's return from England, and then we'll hear his orders. With that, he waved his hand and quickly departed. Once the old fox was imprisoned in the dungeons, he'd lost all his fangs. Jerome had more important matters to attend to than these prisoners. He must immediately reinforce the city's defenses and conduct 24-hour patrols of the jungle valleys surrounding the Vale. He had a hunch that the sudden appearance of the monsters was most likely connected to the mysterious adventure last summer undertaken by Loki, Lawrence, and old Gormarish. Chapter 289, The Destruction of the Blood Pigeon Clan, 3. As a high-sequence holy bishop, Archbishop Jerome's premonition was remarkably accurate. Just as the frequent monster landings on Dark Feather Plain occurred last winter, after Loki ignited the methane in Leviathan's body and destroyed the behemoth, not all the monsters inhabiting Night City perished at sea. Some of the extremely tenacious ancient monsters painstakingly dug tunnels of flesh and blood, diving into the sea and escaping. As they journeyed away from the frigid far north, The first continent they encountered was the Scandinavian peninsula. This is why the frozen coast of Conqueror's fortress frequently shattered. These were the footprints left by the behemoth as it emerged from beneath the sea and entered the sky-severing mountains. Not only the ancient monsters who escaped Leviathan's remains, but also, on the night of Loki's return, all the residents of Storm's End heard the heavy footsteps of the giant. Although the first wave of hunters entering the divine realm remained tight-lipped about the return of the frost giants, the residents of the river valley inevitably caught some clues from their conversations. Jerome's suspicions about the mysterious appearance of unknown monsters near the river valley were correct. Alien monsters did indeed roam the vast, desolate, and uninhabited Shyandran Mountains. However, Mr. Hummel's troops were not harmed by these monsters. The culprit who killed them was less than 2 meters away from him. It was Sophie Starliger, who had been yawning since early morning. Mr. Hummel's 500 private soldiers and 2,000 free knights certainly weren't killed by monsters that escaped from Night City. After all, the entire Scandinavian peninsula covers nearly 750,000 square kilometers. Such a vast territory was home to fewer than 200,000 Vikings. In the vast mountains and uninhabited wilderness, let alone thousands of monsters, even if all the ancient monsters in Night City were to escape and expand tenfold, they would still be mere grains of sand in the ocean. It was Nefertiti and her 7 Anubis warriors who truly annihilated the attackers of Blood Dove Town. During the joint Slavic and English invasion, Duke Bernard ambushed 500 shield axe warriors from Storm's End outside Hanshu village, attempting to eliminate the 1,500 English sailors who had landed. However, he never expected to encounter the giant and stage sword cultivators under the command of Master King, controlling their flying swords. The 2 cultivators mowed down the 500 shield axe warriors in just 3 minutes, like mowing grass. No one escaped, no one survived, not even a cry. The moment they saw the oncoming flash of sword light, their lives had already come to an end. After defeating the sword cultivators, the Anubis warriors created from their bodies were no less powerful than those sword cultivators. These slender undead monsters possessed a dual proficiency in both physical and magical mechanics. In close combat, they wielded scimitars and staffs for close combat, and at medium and long range, they could blast penetrating flies of decay from their mouths. Furthermore, they possessed an invincibility skill. Forged from corpses, these powerful warriors were indestructible. Unless felled and set on fire, they could endlessly drain the vital essence of the living to regenerate themselves. Upon returning to Storm's End from Asgard, upon hearing Jerome's report of the mysterious disappearance of over 20 civilians from the castle, Loki immediately understood Nefertiti was responsible. After a detailed conversation with the pharaoh, he marveled at the decisiveness of this 1,000-year-old creature. She was worthy of a powerful ruler who had ruled vast territories and even brought outer gods under her wing. Her judgment of danger was uncanny. She had eliminated the Zoroastrianism intelligence mongers, hiding underground, with lightning speed, achieving only benefits without any harm. Furthermore, she had also eliminated the lizard Manguras, who had escaped from the summit of the sacred mountain, and seized all of his research results, which had been drawn on papyrus. Before leaving, he approached the female pharaoh and solemnly assigned her the task of defending the rear. After I lead my troops into battle, if those English yellow-haired men aren't fools, they'll likely split up and attack my rear. That means they'll raid Storm's End, Mistook, and Frostwater Village in the river valley. The invading enemy could be English, Huns, Slavs, or Visigothic mercenaries. Even though Meriton lives in Storm's End now, she's no longer useful to the O'Sullivan family. If your brother is who I imagine he is, I wouldn't be surprised if the English allied with the Sabertooth mercenaries attacked the river valley. You lead your mummies and Anubis warriors to defend my rear. Just hold out until I successfully conquer a piece of land. When Sophie comes of age, I will definitely help you find Thebes, the city of the dead, and reclaim your slumbering body. After the 2 high-fived and swore an oath, the Vikings entered the sunken city. However, Jerome, the acting Duke of Storm's End, was unaware of all this. It wasn't that Loki didn't trust him, but rather that this devout old monk held too much holy light in his heart. His life was based on a black and white creed, with no room for gray. Jerome made his own judgment based on his own assessment of the situation, but the outcome was not in line with Nefertiti's wishes. Big sister, what are we going to do? As night fell again, Sophie, who had finally finished her homework, saw Nefertiti emerge from her mind. Today, her expression was solemn, clearly prepared for battle. Let's go, little sister. Today we are going to rescue your friends. Wow. Really? The 7-year-old girl couldn't hide her excitement. This morning, when Lord Jerome was judging the Hummel blood pigeon, Sophie saw her beloved Siren Glyn and her father's friend, blind mountain blood pigeon, among the judges. These two siblings were very kind to her. Whenever they entered the castle, her father would give them the best rooms and offer them the finest wine he would never dare to drink. These were the closest relatives Sophie had ever had since she followed this old man. And now, just a year later, they appeared before her again, imprisoned in a dungeon. Little sister, I'm not a good teacher. I have to admit, I made a mistake. Last night, I should have let you see with your own eyes what they looked like when they were about to attack Storm's End, but I didn't expect them to be so fragile. The patrolling Anubis warriors spotted them and slaughtered them all. 2,500 lives didn't even make it to dawn. But as long as they're still alive, it's not too late. Today, I'll let you see the true colors of these friends. No, Sophie said firmly. Although she was only 7 years old, the rapidly growing girl still had the ability to distinguish right from wrong. Brother Blind Mountain is not that kind of person, and Sister Green is even less so. They are my dad's best friends. How could they attack our city? When everyone is equal in status, everyone is a friend. Don't forget, your dad is now a duke, and he has 3 provinces under his command. His strength can even compete with a Viking king. Who wouldn't be greedy and jealous of such a sweet piece of fat meat? What's more, as long as Loki exists, the bastards in Blood Pigeon Town will have to bear the identity of deserters. Even in a barren land, this is a label that ruins a person's life. There's no point in saying more. I'll let them out tonight. When you see what they look like then, little sister, you'll understand everything. I know this may be too cruel for a 7-year-old child, but how many princesses in an imperial family can have a happy childhood? You may hate me, but at the same time, you will always remember this lesson today. Chapter 290, The Destruction of the Blood Pigeon Clan, 4. Jerome, a believer in the Holy Light, would always uphold the teachings and show the utmost respect to his comrades who had fought shoulder to shoulder. Although the Blood Pigeon Clan was being held in a dungeon pierced with steel pillars, he had no guards posted at the gate. Meanwhile, the survivors of Blood Pigeon Town were provided with all the basic necessities for a basic quality of life, including a change of clothes, clean bedding, food, and clean water. Jerome even arranged for 2 maids to enter the dungeon daily to change their sheets and clothes. Today, however, Loki's eldest daughter, Sophie Sterrig, joined the maids. Miss Sophie, seeing Sophie following the 2 maids, Green, who was lying idly in bed, called out in surprise. However, before she could rise, Sophie flashed, and the 2 maids fell to the ground. Sophie gently stroked their waists and produced a long key. Sister Jelen, I'm here to let you go. Desperate, old man Hummel had never imagined that the savior they awaited in the dungeon would be Loki's adopted, dim-witted daughter. He had no time to ponder such insignificant questions as how did this deaf-mute girl learn to speak. He nimbly rolled off the bed and immediately scrambled to the railing. Hey, my lovely little niece. You're the only one who can see that this is all a misunderstanding. Quick. Let Grandpa out. Grandpa is your father's good friend. If it weren't for me, your father would have died countless times. 2 years ago, when everyone was still struggling under the pressure of Duke Bernard, Blood Pigeon Town, not far from Hanshu Village, was Loki's only ally. Sophie smiled broadly when she saw these familiar faces. She raised her key and gently inserted it into the keyhole. Oh, our Sophie has truly grown up, now dressed in silk and a young lady. Old Hummel forced a kind smile, his eyes curved into crescents. The Blood of Town warriors and free knights who had survived the Anubis warriors also gathered. Everyone watched intently as the young girl unlocked one stone lock after another, until finally, the tiny girl stood before the Vikings. Old Hummel reached out his withered hand, pinched her cheek, and took her frail arm, beginning to walk out. At that moment, Sophie's first doubt swelled up in her heart. Was this usually kind-looking old man's grip on her too strong? Go. I'm not going. As others filed out of the dungeon, only the Siren Green remained. Last autumn, you bunch of cowardly beasts were planning to abandon this land and flee to Visigothia. I didn't want to at first. But I am married to my husband after all, and I am his only wife. In order to fulfill my duties as a wife and for the continuation of the bloodline of the Blood Pigeon family, I endured it. This spring, I originally thought that you were coming to occupy the 2 barren provinces of Dragon's Breath Plateau and Frost Ridge, but I never expected that you would actually plan to rob the thieves. What's more, You even plotted against my friend this time. God knows how much effort Loki has put in to survive in the past 2 years. He's expanding the territory for my Viking people and avenging the brothers who died at the hands of the English last year. And you shameless people actually want to take advantage of the emptiness in his rear and occupy his castle. Green reached out to touch her belly, and at the same time looked at the brick wall behind her, her eyes full of regret. I told you we shouldn't have attacked our former allies. You didn't listen. Now we're here, dead, imprisoned in the dungeons, and you're still trying to escape, led by an innocent girl. I'm ashamed to be associated with you wimps. Go. If you want freedom, I won't stop you. But I'll stay here and wait for Duke Loki to return so we can make things clear. The tall Blind Mountain Blood Pigeon looked at his wife, then back at his father. Blind Mountain was a skilled warrior, wielding his axe on the battlefield with courage and recklessness. However, he wasn't good at thinking, let alone making decisions. For every problem in life, he either turned to his wife for help or followed his father's lead. Now, with their opinions completely divided, he didn't know what to do. Siren Green was the love of his life. Since winning her atop the holy mountain, he had never approached another woman. But his father, Hummel Blood Pigeon, was also a family member he couldn't let go of. To outsiders, Hummel was insidious and cunning, like a venomous snake lurking in the grass. He was extremely pragmatic, and as long as the benefits were lucrative, he would readily resort to plunder, murder his lord, and even betray the Vikings. Anyone who had known him for more than 3 years knew he was not a good person. At the same time, it was undeniable that he dedicated his life to the people of Blood Pigeon Town. Before Father Hummel came to power, Blood Pigeon Town was a shabby fishing village, barely larger than Hanshu Village. With a population of just over 100 fishermen, even the Duke of the River Valley was unwilling to accept this impoverished village into his domain. In this fishing village, where people died of starvation and freezing every year, Hummel Blood Pigeon was born. He was brutal and cunning, unscrupulous. After several successful raids, he built up his own team. He then murdered his brother and father, rapidly developing Blood Pigeon Town through unscrupulous plunder. To the outside world, Hummel was a cruel and venomous serpent, but to his own people, he was a leader of rare talent. He shunned concubines, lived on a dilapidated farm, and even refused to build a castle. But for the people of Blood Pigeon Town, he spent all his fortune building saltworks, and at great expense, either through bondage or intimidation. He acquired skilled workers from the Slavs to boil seawater and refine the salt. From then on, Blood Pigeon Town, thanks to its vast saltworks, quickly became the wealthiest of the vassal states in the valley. But old Hummel remained with his wife, living on a seaside farm with his brothers who had fought alongside him to conquer the world. Last summer, during his raids on England, Hummel had earned a once-in-a-lifetime fortune. He once again used most of the proceeds to purchase ships and develop his military forces, distributing a smaller portion to his longtime followers. He kept nothing for himself. Others didn't understand the depth of old Hummel's lifelong dedication to Blood Pigeon Town, but his own son, Blind Mountain Blood Pigeon, witnessed it all. The reason Dad is willing to bear the infamy and have no bottom line is because Blood Pigeon Town is everything to him. He is also human, but he chooses to protect this land using the ancient and brutal Viking way. As long as the flame of life is not extinguished, he will fight to the end. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 The Destruction of the Blood Pigeon Clan, 5. Blind Mountain still followed Hummel. As soon as he walked out of the dungeon, Old Man Hummel immediately regained his pirate nature. All the way, he used his big hands like iron pliers to tightly grasp Sophie's tender arms. When he saw the soldiers guarding the dungeon door, he directly grabbed the girl's tender neck with his big hands. "Grandpa Blood Pigeon, don't," Sophie had just said half of the words, but Old Man Hummel was not her friend at this time. The dry fingers pierced the skin and pierced into the girl's throat mercilessly. 2 streams of bright red blood immediately flowed down the snow-white neck, like 2 miserable tears of blood. Even if poor Sophie wanted to shout, she could hardly make a sound because her throat was stuck tightly. Hummel's fingers had already reached the artery in her neck. "I truly wanted to save you and Blind Mountain. Why, haha, my silly niece. Life is so difficult, why are you still questioning so many things? I never imagined your shrewd father would raise you to be this foolish. Scandinavia can't support fools. If you're unfortunate enough to be reborn here again in your next life, consider it a lesson." Turning to the guards guarding the dungeon, Old Man Hummel showed two blood-stained fingers. "If you don't want your little princess to die tragically at my hands, show me a way to the dock." "What the hell are you hesitating about? A person's blood is finite. Are you going to wait until this idiot princess bleeds dry before you agree to my request?" Old Man Hummel was the most dangerous of Vikings. To achieve his goals, he would disregard all principles and forsake his relatives. He knew that the most urgent task now was to escape the river valley. Once he returned to the sea, he could return to the free city of the Visigoths. He still had thousands of gold coins in the manor he'd purchased, giving him the capital to turn things around. Whether heading east to the Eastern Tang or west in New World, he had plenty of time to gather strength and make a comeback. However, Old Man Hummel had ultimately overestimated his own abilities. Despite his scheming, he was nothing more than an ordinary bandit leader in the chaotic medieval world. He had never truly witnessed the true darkness of this world, and he had no idea who Sophie, now held in his grasp, truly was. The first thing that caught his eye was the look from the guards at the dungeon entrance. They looked at him as if they had beheld the most terrifying monster in the world. Then, as his fingers pierced the girl's skin, the damp, pulsing sensation of blood gradually faded. Instead, what spilled from his fingers onto the ground wasn't sticky blood, but clumps of dry, fine sand. At the same time, the girl's cries faded. The shadow cast by the torches tumbled and squirmed like a giant, pitch-black hand, quickly enveloping him. Looking down, he saw the girl he'd grasped had transformed into Chap Tao Yuan. Dry, fine yellow sand slipped endlessly through his fingers, and the eerie scene before him brought back memories of the attack they'd suffered the previous night. Those pitch-black, slender monsters with slender dog had slaughtered his troops with ease. When the living perished, they even bit through the flesh, sucking it like pudding, draining it dry into human skin as thin as a withered leaf. Could it be that this frail girl was controlling those terrifying monsters? Only then did Old Man Hummel recall the strange visions he deliberately ignored since Sophie's appearance. Sophie had entered the dungeon with two maids who were changing sheets and clothes. How had a frail 7-year-old girl managed to so quietly overpower two burly Slavic servants and steal their keys? Furthermore, the entrance to the catacombs was guarded by numerous checkpoints. If they had seen a frail girl attempting to enter the dungeons, they would have surely stopped her. Yet, Sophie passed unimpeded. All these doubts were starkly evident before him, yet, overcome with emotion, he chose to ignore them. Beads of sweat began to roll down his cheeks, but, one wrong step, another. It was too late to say anything now. As the light shifted, the grains of sand suspended on the ground transformed into one after another of bandaged, withered monsters. These massive mummies opened their jaws mercilessly, biting down upon Old Man Hummel and his few remaining relatives. "Boss, what the hell is that? Oh my god. It's draining the blood out of me. This one's trying to eat my eyeballs." Though the blood pigeon pirates imprisoned in the dungeon weren't shackled, they were unarmed. Faced with a sudden onslaught of mummies, they could only use their bare hands to battle these powerful monsters. A new round of slaughter had begun. "Charge! Everyone, get out," roared Old Hummel. "Find that holy bishop and tell him there's a monster hiding in Storm's End. We still have a chance to make amends." Hummel Blood Pigeon was a formidable survivor. Even in dire straits, his mind remained clear. Jerome might not know Sophie is possessed, that was his only card. If they could report this to him, and given the old monk's straightforward character, they might still have a chance of survival. But to achieve their goal, they first had to escape alive. This daunting task naturally fell to Blood Pigeon Town's leading warrior, Blind Mountain Blood Pigeon, a Sequence 6C giant path warrior with the might of Storm Warrior. Unfortunately, despite consuming the right potion and ascending to become the Chosen One, Blind Mountain Blood Pigeon was no match for Nefertiti. Just as he was about to transform into a giant, a streak of golden light swiftly leaped from the shadows behind him. The golden scorpion unleashed its stinger, piercing the back of his head with a blazing toxin as hot as sunlight. Blind Mountain fell to the ground, dead without even a roar of despair. In an instant, he was reduced to a pool of golden ichor. In just 2 minutes, all of Hummel's pirates were slaughtered by the Yellow Sands mummy. As for Hummel himself, the Anubis warriors vomited over 10,000 rotten flies into his stomach, and he was then placed in a coffin. This was the ancient Egyptian punishment known as the insect punishment. The rotting flies will use his body as a nest, constantly devouring it, laying eggs, and then dying. When the flies die, their bodies will turn into nutrients, allowing the prisoner to maintain his life characteristics. In this coffin, he will cry continuously for 3 years, until the last fly dies. In April, the average subscription increased from 155 to 190. Keep working hard in May. Chapter 292, The Destruction of the Blood Pigeon Clan, 6. I never imagined there would be one person among these pirates who could uphold the line. I have to say, this completely exceeded my expectations, as the Anubis warriors hammered the copper nails into the coffin holding Old Man Hummel, one by one, and as his cries gradually faded from faint to almost inaudible, Nefertiti gazed towards the end of the dark dungeon. There was one last person there, the siren Glyn. Of all the Vikings who had marched from Blood Dove Town, she alone had pledged her loyalty to Loki. Stepping on the crimson ground, the female pharaoh slowly approached Glyn. Gazing into Sophie's cold eyes, Glyn was filled with fear. As a Viking, she had seen much carnage in her life, but nothing like this before her. Whether it was the terrifying monsters or the golden scorpion that could instantly kill the chosen one, she had never seen or even heard of it. Although her whole body was trembling, she instinctively touched her stomach and mustered the courage to stand. "You're not Sophie, who are you?" After being possessed by Nefertiti, the 7-year-old girl's face and demeanor were completely unlike Sophie herself. While her features were identical, the unconcealed cruelty and brutality in her eyes was something a child could never feign. Jelen knew she must have stumbled upon a profound secret. A terrifying demonic being resided within Sophie's body. With hair standing on end, she surveyed her surroundings, then fell into despair. This was a dungeon. There was only one escape route, and it was now almost completely filled with bloody debris. Sophie stood in the center, and behind her were countless terrifying demons. They all stared at her in unison. Jelen had no room to escape. Nefertiti had also keenly noticed her subtle movements. The pharaoh knew this person must not be spared. If the root of the problem isn't eradicated, it will spring up again. If she wasn't mistaken, there must be one last member of the Blood Pigeon clan in her belly. If this baby were allowed to grow up successfully, it would inevitably become a formidable problem. After all, the entire Blood Pigeon clan had perished at her hands. As a female pharaoh who had lived for thousands of years and ruled over millions of subjects, words like mercy, kindness, and kindness simply didn't exist for Nefertiti. As a ruler, she was constantly busy. If unnecessary troubles could be resolved the simplest way, she would definitely not choose any backup options that might cause more trouble. For 90% of the world's difficulties and problems, the simplest solution was to kill the opponent. Gently picking up a bloody hatchet from the ground, she wordlessly stepped forward. Meanwhile, Jelen didn't know what to do. Although her brain kept warning her, although every cell in her body was urging her to flee as soon as possible, her body was cold and she could barely move. He watched helplessly as Nefertiti approached him, raising her hatchet. Just as she was about to swing, she suddenly stopped. Nefertiti was also stunned. Because within her sea of consciousness, 7-year-old Sophie was holding onto her arms tightly. "Big sister, can you please spare Sister Jelen's life? She's very good to Daddy, and she's also very good to me. Last summer, she even hugged me. She's a sister who loves to laugh, and her embrace is very warm. She's my family." Nefertiti glanced at Sophie coldly and ignored her. Cutting the grass at its roots is the most basic principle of a king. All monarchs who made such stupid decisions to let go of their enemies because of unwarranted mercy have turned to dust. However, Sophie's soft palms were also unusually firm at this time. The girl certainly knew who the female pharaoh who was living in her body was. Not to mention how much killing the two had caused before, just looking at the bloody dungeon at this moment. Not only the surviving private army of Old Man Hummel, but even the gatekeeper of Wind's End who was in charge of guarding the entrance of the dungeon died at the hands of Nefertiti. 2 months ago, Sophie could not understand the saying one's own people died in one's own hands, but now she not only understood it, but also knew that this was something that had to be done. The female pharaoh wanted to hide her identity, and these guards had to die. In this way, she could report to Jerome. The Blood Pigeon tribe wanted to escape, and the brave guards drew their swords to stop them, and both sides died together. She would never let Green go, a sister who ruthlessly slaughtered even her own people. But Sophie still insisted. Even if everyone in the Blood Pigeon clan deserved death, Green did not deserve this kind of treatment. She had demonstrated her loyalty to Loki through both her actions and words. Moreover, she was pregnant. Although the child's surname was Blood Pigeon, It was still Green's sister's child. Gazing into the girl's determined eyes, Nefertiti sighed and lowered her hatchet. The pharaoh knew the consequences of letting Green go. Not only would she and the child become Sophie's enemies, but she had also learned the great secret that Nefertiti was hiding within Sophie. If she revealed this information to the Illuminati, the difficulties they would face would be more than just trouble. They would face a true disaster. That's all. The most important lesson in life is to make your own decisions and then bear the consequences of them. This is a necessary part of everyone's growth. When I was 7, I wouldn't have dared to rebel against my father, yet just a year later, you were so resolute in defying me. Perhaps you can truly rise from this catastrophe. Throwing away the hatchet, Nefertiti shook her head again, and walked away with the mummy. Leaving behind her was a strewn mess of limbs, blood, and the terrified, nearly exhausted Siren Glynn. Chapter 293 Negotiation 1. 14 days later, on the other side of the North Sea, the backward communication methods of the Middle Ages left Loki completely unaware of what was happening in his homeland. Meanwhile, he faced a far greater challenge. Ivar O'Sullivan, the reinforcement summoned to Mercia by Archbishop Francis using the Asgard portal as bait, was now seated before him. The invasion of the Scarlet Creator a week earlier had caused extensive damage to Sea-Watch Fortress. Had Loki not immediately ordered all troops to the battle, the Scarlet Creator, suddenly appearing from the blood mist, would have caused even greater casualties. Even so, after forcing the gates open and escaping the castle, he still lost over 1,000 men to traps, ballistae, and sniper fire from Mercian soldiers. This was only possible thanks to the saber-toothed mercenaries surrounding him from both sides. The complex corridors of Sea-Watch Fortress slowed the spread of the blood mist, and when the evening wind blew, the spreading blood mist was still insufficient to support the Scarlet Creator's entire body from the blood mist illusion. If this guard had broken through the barriers of time and space and appeared intact in the Sea-Watch Fortress, Loki couldn't imagine what would become of the kingdom of Mercia. The Mercian princess, Elizabeth Ella, sat not far from them. After that reckless assassination attempt, she had come to understand the full extent of her sin. Yet, to her astonishment, Loki hadn't forgotten her in the blood mist. As blood dripped and the mist began to dissipate, his first instinct was to force her out of the room and send her to rescue his father. As all the Viking warriors opened the city gates and charged, it was this lord who stood at the end, protecting him and his father and allowing them to escape. Many Vikings perished in the ballistae and traps outside the city walls. All of this was because of the wound he had inflicted on him with his miracle spell. When the blood mist finally dissipated and the Viking king's troops stormed the city, Loki, far from imprisoning her, granted her complete freedom. The two had only made a verbal agreement. I know I'm evil in your eyes. I completely understand your desire to kill me, but even when it comes to eliminating evil, there are priorities. Right now, a group of truly evil individuals are about to appear before us. If we can work together to deal with this great trouble, I can guarantee 10 years of peace in Mercia. You'll have 10 years of freedom to think about how to eliminate me. He gently patted the Mercian princess's white palm, and the two of them practically high-fived and swore an oath. From that day on, Elizabeth was no longer a Viking prisoner. Dressed in a long linen dress suitable for a servant, she could enter any room at will, even leaving the castle unimpeded. Therefore, when Loki and Ivar met again, she disguised herself as a wine maid, holding a bottle of crimson wine and standing about 5 meters away. Loki himself, naturally, didn't seem to mind. When he told Ulysses Ella, "From now on, you and I are on the same team," he wasn't lying. To secure a piece of land and prosper in the English Isles, he needed the support of the Mercian royal family in every way. If he could defeat Ivar with the help of the 7 nations, it would be the perfect token of his loyalty. Unfortunately, the combat capabilities displayed by the saber-toothed mercenaries far exceeded his expectations. Landing on the shallows of the kingdom of Northumbria, they plundered and looted their way through, winning battle after battle. Loki intended to hunker down his entire army at Sea-Watch, using the dense defenses forged by Mercian craftsmen around the castle to wear down the Viking king's forces. However, Elizabeth's sudden attack disrupted this plan, forcing him to feign an expedition to support the Vikings. At this point, the two armies would meet. A clear disagreement arose regarding the next battle plan. "Brother Loki, you've become a duke at such a young age. I admire your luck, and your courage. Young men in their 20s always think they can chop down all obstacles with their axes. Little do they know what dangers lurk beyond the dark skies," Snapping his fingers, Ivar gestured to the wine glass before him. Elizabeth obediently approached and poured the wine from the bottle. You lived and grew up in Scandinavia. You have no idea of the power of the rulers of the 7 kingdoms of England, and even less of the formidable power of Wessex. Otherwise, you wouldn't have proposed something as naive as attacking Southampton. Loki narrowed his eyes as he looked at Ivar, who was sipping his wine. Ever since he joined his troops and entered the city, he had acted like a king. While this was true, Loki had never considered him truly an emperor. Clearing his throat, he was about to speak when Ivar set down his glass, interrupting him again. There's an old saying among the Eastlanders, shoot the horse before you shoot the man. The 7 kingdoms of England may appear to be allied, but in reality, they're not united. We have so many different targets to choose from, why go for the toughest ones? To kill a man, we don't necessarily have to drive an axe into his skull, simply severing his limbs leaves him with no chance of survival. What we should do now is to concentrate our superior forces and turn to capture Oxford. After capturing the city, we'll massacre it for 3 days, giving our men a taste of their own medicine and taking away all its property. Then, we'll turn to East Anglia and then East Saxony, burning every farmland and plundering every noble along the way. I'll make these Englishmen wet their pants whenever they mention the word Viking. Even if only the kingdom of Wessex remains, it won't cause much trouble. Ivar spoke with apparent composure, but only he understood the doubt swirling within him. Compared to old hands like Duke Bernard and Old Man Hummel, born and raised in Viking lands, Ivar, born in Constantinople, was a distinguished talent, having received formal military training from the Western continent. His abilities far surpassed those illiterate Viking natives. During the operations this spring, from the moment he learned of Loki's intention to invade England, he knew he would inevitably be drawn into the conflict. Therefore, he leveraged his intelligence network to contact Hummel Blood Pigeon in the distant free city of the Visigoths. His plan envisioned Old Man Hummel sailing back across the North Sea at the opportune moment to seize Loki's lair in the river valley, instantly crumbling these seemingly formidable enemies. At that point, it would no longer be a matter of reaching out to him for the portal key. He would have to offer the Asgard portal to him, and perhaps, for his exceptional strategic talent, he could spare his life. He had learned through ravens 2 weeks ago that Hummel Blood Pigeon had set sail with 3,000 troops. Such a force would crush the elderly, weak, and sick remaining in the valley with overwhelming force. However, 2 weeks later, Hummel's troops seemed to have melted into the sea, with no news at all. Consequently, he was forced to passively consider his next move. His first task was to incorporate this unruly, wolf-like Viking lord into his army. Yesterday, the number of monthly tickets skyrocketed by 22. Remember, my book only gets over 50 monthly tickets a month. Yesterday alone, I felt like I had found a treasure. I'm deeply grateful. Chapter 294 Negotiation, 2. From a Viking's perspective, Ivar's strategy was indeed sound. For millennia, the Vikings' ability to maneuver across this continent hinged on their immense mobility. Upon landing, these powerful warriors moved like a swarm of locusts, slaying and plundering at high speed. Ivar's tactics exemplified the ancient Viking ancestral precepts. He was not only a successful merchant, but also a powerful warlord who had thoroughly mastered the wields of plunder passed down from his ancestors. However, his goal was not what Loki sought. Loki had 3 objectives in mind for this journey. 1. To secure a piece of land in the fertile English Isles. This would permanently free him from the Viking king's rule. 2. To eliminate Egbert. Thus, without a core force, the 7 kingdoms would degenerate into a state of disunity. 3. If possible, to eliminate Ivar O'Sullivan by any means necessary. Then, he could secure the Asgard portal, to acquire land and ensure the permanent residence of his people in the English Isles for generations to come. One must not act too drastically. Born in the Red Kingdom in his previous life, Loki deeply understood the powerful role that people can play in a war. When a large number of people are forced into a corner, the power they unleash is simply unmatched by armies or mercenaries. No matter how dark and bloody the situation, life will always find a way to survive. The looting methods of Hummel Blood Pigeon last summer simply leave no chance for the English. Remember, this country isn't like the Vikings, who inhabited a barren and cold land. The fertile English Isles are home to at least 3 million English households. Mercia alone boasts a population exceeding 1 million. Faced with such a vast population, even if Loki's 5,000 Viking warriors were all gods, they wouldn't be able to subdue them through force. To survive in their lands, He must learn to cooperate with the Mercian royal family. Upon hearing the Viking king's looting plans, Elizabeth nearly lost her grip on the bottle. Loki naturally observed all of this. He made a subtle gesture to the Mercian princess, urging her to remain calm, then spoke slowly. Your Majesty, shooting the horse first is only half the story. The second half is capture the leader first. The Vikings are called Vikings precisely because of you, their king. Similarly, the alliance of the 7 kingdoms of England is entirely due to the might of Wessex. We have now landed on their lands and successfully won our first battle. With this once-in-a-millennium opportunity, we should seize Southampton in one fell swoop. If we do so, the 7 kingdoms of England will be leaderless and inevitably plunge back into division and civil strife. This is the fundamental way to long-term stability. Otherwise, simply looting without striking a fatal blow against a bandit leader will only serve to unite these scattered English scumbags even more tightly. By then, the power they can unleash will be far beyond the reach of the small population of the 7 Viking provinces. Conversations between intelligent people should never be simply superficial. Ivar's sole purpose in sending his troops to aid Loki was to retrieve the Asgard portal key from his possession. However, since entering Sea-Watch, he hadn't mentioned this, instead projecting a sincere cooperative air. Every day, they discussed the next military deployment plan. Loki, knowing the true nature of this man beneath his refined facade, had his own plans. The best way to win this war was to let the enemies fight each other. The ideal scenario was to pit Ivar against Egbert. This would allow him to simultaneously achieve objectives 2 and 3 of his 3 goals, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Unfortunately, Ivar wasn't some hot-headed, illiterate fisherman. Having grown up in Constantinople, he was well versed in the machinations of monarchs. Despite Loki's eloquent appeals to reason and emotion, the old fox showed no sign of sending troops. The 2 men had a major disagreement over the next battle plan. They had already been stranded within the ruined Sea-Watch fortress for 7 days. During these 7 days, the English coalition had suffered heavy losses, with almost all of their troops fleeing back to their own territory. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that now was the opportune moment to pursue their victory. They could no longer wait. After a day of fruitless talks, Loki climbed the shattered castle walls and made his way back to his penthouse suite. The bloody creator, appearing in the blood mist, had already destroyed much of the fortress, disappearing only when the sea breeze cleared it. The western sun shone on the shattered walls, revealing the figure climbing the fortress with a striking loneliness. To protect King Ulysses Elam of Mercia from being slaughtered by unsuspecting Viking warriors, he continued to imprison the old man atop the castle. Princess Elizabeth had once questioned him, asking if he considered them allies. Why didn't he allow her elderly father to return to Oxford? Loki looked at her like she was an idiot, until she involuntarily folded her arms across her chest. Only then did he shake his head and say, "Go ask your father if he's willing to go back." The girl actually went to ask, and only then did she understand the meaning. If they returned to Oxford now, they would surely meet their end at the hands of their uncle, Prince Lancelot. Having been held captive by the enemy for so many days, Lancelot had already negotiated a price with the lords of the various provinces of Mercia and Oxford for his support in the throne. Now, all he needed was the body of Ulysses Elam. With that body, he could devise 100 ways to shift the blame on Loki and Sea-Watch, and then legitimately claim the throne. Sometimes, it's not the enemy who's dying, but a close comrade or even a relative who's dying. Growing up in the prosperous and flourishing Constantinople, Ivar naturally understood this truth. Therefore, he cleverly evaded Loki's advice and exemplified the millennia-old ancestral motto, "We are merely bandits. We will always prey on the weak." This man must have seen my ambition to conquer a territory in the English Isles. Therefore, he deliberately employed these bandit tactics. Perhaps he also understood that I would not easily hand over the key to the Asgard portal. Thus, he needed time to slowly torture me. As long as I was trapped in Scandinavia, it was his territory, his home turf. He had 1,000 ways to make my life miserable until I finally surrendered the portal key. Thus, his first tactic was to massacre the 7 nations, completely wiping out my possibility of remaining here. In his calm solitude, Loki deciphered the logic behind Ivar's proposed alliance. It must be said that the Viking king Ivar O'Sullivan was the one most similar to the military strategists in textbooks. This man possessed clear objectives, a quick mind, and a profound understanding of how to manipulate people. Yet, he was also a formidable foe whom he must confront. Expecting him to fall into his trap like a foolish dove was utterly unrealistic. This war was far from over. Chapter 295 Negotiation 3. 2 days later, unable to convince each other, the two men split up. This was a cardinal sin in military strategy, but Loki had no choice. At the foot of the city walls, he bid the Viking king a final farewell. Your Majesty, time and history will prove that my choice was the right one. Admittedly, Wessex is extremely powerful, but there are always those who will rise to the challenge. I am willing to spearhead the way for your king. Once I have eliminated all of Ecbert's followers, and he becomes weaker, I believe you will seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to attack. After 2 days of careful consideration, Loki decided to attack Wessex alone. First, he could not follow Ecbert. While plundering along with him might bring him great wealth, returning to Scandinavia would immediately make him vulnerable. Second, he could not engage in a decisive battle with Ivar in the English Isles. Despite the casualties of the battles since landing, he still commanded 7,000 saber-toothed mercenaries. Even if Loki could win, it would be a Pyrrhic victory, and he would be immediately annihilated by the English reinforcements that would arrive shortly thereafter. Therefore, he could only attack Wessex alone. Wessex's wealth rivaled that of the other 6 kingdoms combined. He knew that if he made this move, Ivar would inevitably wait and see, his actions skeptical. First, he couldn't let Loki die, as he still held the portal key to Asgard. Second, he would undoubtedly harbor illusions about Loki's combat prowess. After all, Wessex was a wealthy nation capable of supporting dragons. Few lords possessed such power in the entire western continent. If Loki could truly achieve a mutually devastating defeat against this nation, Ivar, with his ability to seize opportunities, would undoubtedly bark his fangs and bite hard, just as Humble-Blood Pigeon, the final reaper of the battlefield in the defense of Coldwater Village, did. Despite his splendid attire, elegant conversation, and vast knowledge, he was still, at heart, a Viking leader. It was a gene ingrained in his spine, a mark of his ancestors that could never be erased. In Loki's plan, having him accompany him on the expedition was naturally the best option, but he had cleverly chosen to evade the hook, leaving him with the next best option. As long as Ivar remained in the game, he had no need to concede defeat. Brother Loki, I admire your valor. Since you have decided to risk everything to expand the Viking frontier, I will say no more. You are a warrior admired by Odin. All the gods of Valhalla and the ancestors of House Starlag are surely watching you from the heavens. I sincerely wish that this seemingly foolish decision of yours will bear fruit. May you and I witness the bountiful harvest this autumn. Outside the city gates, Ivar offered the kind words of good fortune that any king would offer to a beloved general. Loki nodded his forehead, accepting the offer. He could see the respectful gazes of all the Viking warriors turning to him. It was as if they were watching a hero headed for destruction. Lord Loki, the gods in Valhalla are surely watching you. I will gaze upon the stars, just as all the warriors of Wolf Creek gaze upon your axe. I wish you a wonderful hunt. The Duke of Wolf Creek, Kjasker Wolf, thrust his mighty hand against his chest. Beside him, a massive dire wolf, over a man's height, howled to the heavens. Behind him, 2,000 wolf riders rose in unison to bid him farewell. Lord Vonner Spur of the Bay, separated from the river valley by the sky-breaking mountains, handed him a cannon barrel that could be cocked and fired. As the Viking clan best known for its shipbuilding, the bay boasted the largest shipyard in Scandinavia. Every year, over half of the timber produced in the forests of Fogduck Town was sold to Vonner's shipyard. Therefore, the Duke and Loki could be considered old acquaintances. My dear friend, be sure to leave a few flames behind and tell your story to the Vikings in the bay. At any time, retreat to the coastline and draw near the cannon barrels, and the ship slaves hidden along the shoreline will surely meet you and bring you back safely. The last to step forward was Tiref, Duke of Sky Island, one of the 4 provinces northwest of Mount Skybreak. This was the smallest of the 7 Viking provinces, and their lands lay beneath the frozen seas of the far north. The Frostmen were not known for their eloquence. He gazed at Loki in silence, finally handing him the great axe. Ivar watched the scene with apathy. No Viking could resist a death as brilliant as fire. This was the principle of life he had instilled in all the saber-toothed mercenaries from childhood. Precisely because they believed their lives should be like this, Loki and his 5,000 warriors were now gods in their eyes. Under the gaze of everyone, Loki left Sea-Watch. He headed south, heading straight for Wessex, southern Mercia. After walking just a few dozen kilometers and confirming the saber-toothed mercenaries were out of sight, Loki's first action was to walk to the prison wagon at the end of the column, unlock the doors, and release all the English nobles imprisoned under his command, as well as several kings and nobles captured from the apple orchard. My English friends, I'm sure you all understand that if I were to execute you here, your kingdom would be plunged into civil strife, saving me a great deal of trouble, but as it happens, I don't want to do that today. Today is your lucky day. I will temporarily imprison you in a special place. You will be treated humanely there until this war is over. Then, Loki retrieved the bloodstone statue, opened a portal, and transported them to the sunken city. Last autumn, nearly every Viking raider had sought refuge in the sunken city. So many people knew the secret that it no longer needed to be kept secret. I promise you, by the time you emerge from this city, this war will be over. When you reappear, I will capture Egbert as well, bringing your family together. By then, Wessex will have been crushed by me, and you can take revenge and settle your grievances. You will call me generous Lord Loki, because I know Egbert has been riding on your necks, showing off his power for years. The prisoners filed into the portal together. Loki did not place them in chains, for there was only one way to escape the sunken city, through the portal. Oh, and a friendly reminder, once you enter this city, do not wander around. Especially do not look up at the sky. If you don't listen, you will have nightmares in the future. Don't say I'm not big enough for you. Of all the hostages, he left only Ulysses, Ella and Elizabeth with him. At this point, Loki gazed toward the unknown mountains to the south, knowing he had accomplished all he could. The dice had been cast, and no one knew what the final result would be. But by sheer chance, the situation had come to this. Now, he had no choice but to march against the wind. Chapter 296, The Border of Wessex, 1. May in the English Isles is at its most vibrant. Amidst the emerald green mountains, a myriad of unidentified flowers bloomed. As he journeyed southward through Mercia, the temperature rose as the latitude decreased. Loki became increasingly aware of the land's natural bounty. Nearing the Wessex border, the seeds sown by Mercian farmers had already grown into seedlings over a foot tall. Meanwhile, in Scandinavia, the ground had not yet thawed and May Viking farmwomen had to wait at least another month before planting. Thus, crops that mature 2 or 3 times a year in the English Isles could only survive one season in Scandinavia. This required a timely thaw in the spring, and the first snows of autumn to arrive early. A slight change in conditions could mean a few acres of thin land would be barren. Along the way, the shadow of war did not dampen the farmers' enthusiasm for the fields. Although the kingdom of Mercia was vastly more prosperous than the Vikings, the peasants at the bottom of society, unable to plunder like the Vikings, still faced a life of work or starvation. Though everyone had heard the news that the O'Sullivan family's saber-toothed mercenaries had landed in Northumbria, they continued to sow their painstakingly harvested seeds in the fields, drooling and hungry. Then, they clasped their hands together and prayed that the demons from Scandinavia would not trample their land. Loki, intending to reside permanently in Mercia, would certainly not do such a thing. He led his 5,000 warriors and baggage wagons by day and night, choosing to travel through woodlands and ravines. This allowed him to conceal his route and avoid the fire-breathing dragons that soared overhead. Everyone could see that the young lord was serious about invading Wessex, and Egbert would undoubtedly fight the war with all his might. He would no longer resort to sending a few flying dragons for a few circles in the air. With the war now at this point, he would dispatch all his elite troops to prevent Loki from advancing further south. Ulysses Lr witnessed all of this. Having been freed from his captivity for several days, he could now ride a horse at Loki's side. Like true king and subject, the two marched together at the forefront of the army. Young man, I don't understand. If you're simply after land, you've already imprisoned nearly half the nobles of the 7 kingdoms in Sea-Watch Fortress, and you command a powerful army. If you consider the Viking king your enemy, simply defect to the lords of the English Isles. They'll be grateful and willing to cooperate with you. In our lands, you have the advantage of time and location, and you can easily defeat the Viking king's army. Then not only will the English Isles be yours, but all of Scandinavia will be yours. All you need to do is swear fealty to Egbert of Wessex, as we have. Isn't that safer and less risky? Ulysses had lived for most of his life, and he deeply understood the immense uncertainty of war. In his long 70 years, he had witnessed countless young men, fearless and unstoppable, rushing into battle, only to lead their armies to destruction. In his eyes, Loki had already secured a winning hand. With such a powerful hostage in hand, he had 1,000 ways to achieve his goal. Yet, he chose the most arduous of them all, a head-on war with Wessex. In the warm firelight of the camp, Loki looked at the old man beside him and shook his head gently. Old man, appeasement, compromise, and low-key development are indeed part of the path to hegemony. After experiencing the siege of Sea-Watch, I have to admit that you are a man capable of maintaining a legacy. With such a meager force, you were able to develop Mercia to this point. With all due respect, I simply cannot imagine how you did it. However, these are turbulent times. Whether we want to face it or not, the shadow of war looms over us all. In such a situation, killing is the first necessity for survival. Just then, Elizabeth saddled her horse and approached. Ulysses looked at his young daughter with concern. When disaster struck, his eldest and second sons, whom he had so carefully nurtured with so much resources, never appeared before him. Only Elizabeth, who spent her days among the poor, peasants, and orphans, remained loyal to him, caring for him along the way. He also witnessed the giant that suddenly appeared and nearly destroyed Sea-Watch. Although both Loki and Elizabeth remained silent about the incident, his father's intuition told him that it must be related to his daughter. Elizabeth was not a pure human. At this time, he was the only one who knew this secret. With my current strength, I can fight the Viking king head-on. But I cannot do that, because I need him to help us eliminate the neighboring countries entrenched in Mercia. Northumbria, East Anglia, East Saxony, Essex, Kent, these countries are all stumbling blocks to a pursuit of hegemony. If we can use the power of the saber-toothed mercenaries to weaken their armies, we will have no disadvantages. As for Wessex, it is the biggest cancer that is exploiting Mercia. And Egbert has become so powerful that even the Viking king is unwilling to face him. This kind of enemy can only be eliminated personally. After a brief moment of reflection, 70-year-old Ulysses Ella stared at Loki with wide, aging eyes, incredulous. If his plan worked, he would reduce all 7 kingdoms of England to ruin within a year, while also significantly depleting the Viking king's military might. If he triumphed in this gamble, he could, in just a few short years, build a vast empire spanning Scandinavia and the English Isles. Within this empire, all nations would be forced to become vassals, and he would instantly become a rising emperor whose territory rivaled that of the Duchy of France. This young man's ambition was truly beyond comprehension. A person's life may seem long, but in reality, it's only a few decades, like a meteor streaking through the sky. In this life, there will always be mountains to climb and bloodshed to endure. Only by facing challenges head-on and overcoming inner demons can one embark on a brief period of peace. Simply avoiding them will ultimately lead to a lingering existence in the shadows of the powerful. The more capable will become pawns in the hands of others. Those who lack the strength will be completely eliminated by time. Old man, if I'm honest, I don't have your innate business skills. I can't imagine how you managed to raise Mercia, a fat sheep, into what it is today, surrounded by 6 jackwalls. I only know how to fight. Therefore, I can only bare my fangs and fight them to the death. Listen, they are coming. Chapter 297, The Border of Wessex, 2. Amidst a gentle tremor resembling spring rain and thunder, the first wave of Wessex's defenses finally appeared from the mountains near the border. This was a multidimensional force comprised of heavily armored knights, heavy infantry, Moan knights, and armored war elephants. Just as the beacon of democracy before the time travel, it wouldn't simply send its own soldiers into battle. This attacking force primarily consisted of the armies of Wessex, East Anglia, East Saxony, and Kent. To increase the impact of the attack against the giants, Egbert even deployed the armored war elephants he had purchased at great expense from the free city of the Visigoths. These powerful beasts, capable of carrying 5 tons, once fully armored, their charge was so powerful that even the chosen ones in the sea giant's path could withstand it. In many cases, even encountering giants that had survived from ancient times, the armored elephants were able to pierce them from head to toe with their razor-sharp tusks. This force was not only formidable, but also meticulously deployed and executed. Egbert must have intended to keep the enemy at bay, so he dispatched Wessex's foremost general, the Dragon Knight Andrew Evans. He had anticipated that Loki would camp in this woodland tonight. To completely annihilate the invading enemy, he deployed a front and rear encirclement strategy. Heavy cavalry armed with spears charged down the hillside, a blaze of piercing light piercing the enemy lines. Meanwhile, in Loki's retreating path, armored elephants and phalanxes of heavy infantry were already waiting. Thousands of gleaming spears were lined up, awaiting the Vikings' arrival. For air supremacy, the 4 kingdoms were also devoting all their resources. Meanwhile, The Moan knights soaring through the sky carried not iron arrows, but highly flammable kerosene. From high above, they hurled canisters of kerosene into the Viking camp, followed by flammable fire. Like a galaxy of stars, the flames drifted from the sky, becoming a blaze of death. As the flames fell to the ground, huge blazes erupted throughout Loki's camp. Amidst a blaze, Loki hefted his bloody axe and gazed at the heavily armored cavalry charging down from the hills. After a dash of nearly a kilometer, their speed had reached a terrifying peak. A row of steel spears, nearly 5 meters long, stood before them, transforming the cavalry into sharp swords, piercing the center of the army. Even a rookie with no experience in battle knew that confronting the running armored cavalry was utterly foolish. Yet, that was precisely what Loki chose. On a battlefield in a state of flux, the enemy's greatest hope was the first signal from your mind. The English army's volleys of musketry and their high-altitude fires were designed to lure him back into the seemingly harmless narrow valley beyond the valley. It was certain that the most dangerous part of this ambush lay in that quiet, dark valley. Therefore, Loki decisively ordered a countercharge. My dear friends, this frustrating war has dragged on until now. We can finally let loose and kill them all, break their bones. Facing the charging spears of the heavily armored knights, the Viking warriors drew their axes and roared with excitement. The trumpeter drew the horn hanging from his waist, took a deep breath, and blew 2 low, humming blasts. Hearing the order to change formation, the Viking warriors quickly deployed into the charging formation they had practiced so many times in Asgard. At the forefront of the triangular formation stood a row of mountain giants, who had obtained the latest potion from the saga book. This group of mountain giant pathways consisted mostly of strong Slavic men. Most of them had already consumed the Sequence 5 Granite Guardian potion, and a few had even upgraded to Sequence 4 Crystal Giants. Seeing the charging English cavalry approaching, the mountain giant pathways, transformed into heavily armored giants, tore down tree after tree, carrying the massive stumps, nearly 20 meters long, onto the shoulders of their companions in front of them. Boom, boom, boom. As the giants in the front row charged, carrying wooden stakes on their shoulders, the entire earth seemed to tremble under the weight. The cavalrymen's lances seemed sharp, but compared to the giants wielding the ancient stumps like gaunts, their weapons seemed like children's toys. Delicate, yet fragile. The two armies collided head-on like two opposing waves, and the heavily armored cavalry was truly a one-sided crushing defeat. The heavy wooden stakes, weighing tens of tons, were accelerated by the giants and, like dozens of heavy hammers, smashed into the cavalrymen's exquisite armor. There was no cry, no howl, not even the sound of shattering armor. The English cavalry died suddenly and in a silent silence. In the instant the two armies clashed, dozens of brilliant blood flowers bloomed neatly in the empty woodland, like vibrant flowers suddenly appearing on a deep blue canvas under the twilight. The mountain giants, carrying the massive logs on their shoulders, only faltered slightly, but this slight force was barely enough to tickle the Odin followers, who had imbibed the full potion. The sea giants and frost giants in the back drove tree stumps into the ground, while the mountain giants in the front lowered logs to use as fulcrums. Before they could wipe away the bloody residue that splattered their bodies, the second, third, and even fourth waves of armored cavalrymen had already slammed into the massive logs, which stood silently upright on the ground. They tried to change course and escape, but the horses, clad in 200 kilograms of armor, wouldn't allow them to do so. It wasn't just the charging armored cavalry who suffered a heavy blow, the Moa riders above were now being baptized by thunder. A dozen chosen ones of the Thunder God's path stretched their arms toward the sky, and a leaden cloud began to gather above them. As the thunder callers softly chanted prayers, several thick bolts of lightning burst from the clouds, connecting with their outstretched arms. The Moa knights, soaring through the air at breakneck speed, watched their hair fly against the wind. They desperately tugged at their reins, trying to escape the dark clouds. However, no matter how fast a Moa flew, it was no match for the thunderbolt from the clear sky. Bolts as thick as buckets pierced their bodies with pinpoint precision. Amidst the resounding explosions, the Moa knights' fuel tanks ignited mercilessly in midair. Brilliant fireworks blazed in the sky, each one heralding the loss of a life. In a matter of minutes, the high-flying Moa knights were decimated. Several extreme survivors near the edge of the battlefield, no longer minding the battlefield's prohibitions, fled with all their might, without a backward glance. What seemed like a well-planned ambush was averted in just 10 minutes by the powerful followers of Odin. The Vikings roared and high-fived each other, But Loki held his breath, gazing intently at the valley behind him, where startled birds were constantly taking flight. "Now that you're here, aren't you going to show up?" he muttered to himself. Behind him, at the end of the canyon, the armored war elephants raised their hooves and charged. With a few resounding dragon roars, the dragon riders of Wessex soared into the air, revealing their massive form once again before Loki. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298, The Border of Wessex, 3. Across the entire western continent, Wessex's position as the leader of the 7 kingdoms of the English Isles is largely due to the enormous expense and training of the dragon riders, cultivated by Egbert. These ancient beasts, first domesticated by the Romantic French, possess unrivaled attack power, defense, speed, and endurance. The participation of 1 or 2 dragon riders can often turn the tide of battle. Meanwhile, 3 enormous dragons soared from a nearby valley. Under the control of their dragon riders, they spread their wings and glided toward Loki. The Viking warriors on the ground could even see the plumes of smoke billowing from the beasts' mouths. This signaled the completion of their dragon breath charge. However, the lightning from the sky, powerful enough to shatter a moa, struck the heavily scaled dragons, but had no killing effect. As for the dragon riders riding on the dragon's neck, they wore magical armor blessed by the Archbishop of Canterbury. This armor not only provided formidable defense but also significantly suppressed the psychic attacks of the Chosen Ones. The Thundercaller's thunderbolts proved ineffective against them. But Loki remained unfazed, a mysterious smile playing on his face. The most formidable enemy on the battlefield lay lurkers hidden in unknown lands. He feared these dragon riders, tucked away in the valley. If they dared to reveal themselves, this valley would be their demise. With a gentle wave of his hand, the Vikings' baggage train behind them immediately unfurled the sampans of their wagons. As planks peeled off one by one, the wagons, seemingly carrying provisions, were devoid of a single grain of rice. Instead, there were over 30 dragon-slaying ballistae captured from the fortress of Sea-Watch. Ulysses Ella stretched out his trembling fingers at the sight before him, completely unable to form words. Never before in the entire western continent had a general dared to march without rations. Along the way, Loki passed by vast farmhouses and fertile fields, never allowing his troops to plunder. Everyone, even the king of Mercia, assumed his wagons were carrying food and fodder. Who could have imagined that this insane lord would only allow his soldiers to carry 3 days' worth of rations? After 3 days, no one was left with anything to eat, because the wagons weren't carrying food at all, but 30 dragon-slaying ballistae. He had actually calculated that the Wessex army would appear as soon as they approached the Wessex border. Loki had successfully deceived everyone, and so the Sorn dragon met its demise. While Viking warriors generally lacked bows and crossbows, Slavic hunters, skilled in mountain hunting, were quite proficient. Turning their cannons toward the dragon in the air, the first volley of arrows, 30 massive steel bolts roughly 3 meters long and weighing 40 kilograms, instantly reduced the dragon to a hedgehog. Before it could even ignite, the massive figure, pierced with steel, plummeted from the sky. Astride the dragon's neck, Wessex's captain, Ander Evans, was furious. He had many questions in mind. How had these Vikings managed to load the dragon-slaying ballista onto their wagons while thousands of Mercian citizens watched? Why hadn't anyone warned Wessex? And how could a commander who dared to march without provisions survive in such a chaotic world? Unfortunately, he couldn't ask any questions at the moment. He gripped the scales at the back of the dragon's neck tightly, roaring in an inarticulate dragon tongue, trying to get the swooping dragon out of the range of the dragon-killing ballista. However, as he dove, the gusts of wind rushing into his mouth made it impossible for him to utter a valid cry. Meanwhile, the dragon's breath, still brewing, was forced to release. As the soaring dragon's mouth belched flames at the shield-raising Vikings on the ground, Ender knew his life was coming to an end. He could hear the beast's dying howls as he watched at least 20 thick steel spears pierce the dragon's guts. As the dead beast fell to the ground, he didn't even have time to leap from the dragon's neck before a flying hatchet lodged itself in his skull, ending his life instantly. Reaching out with a massive foot, he placed a foot on Ender's head and wrenched the hatchet free. Loki once again realized the strength of the first men's bodies. According to Archbishop Francis's understanding of dragon riders, to tame a dragon, one must first defeat it. Those capable of controlling dragon riders typically train at the War Academy in Constantinople. This is the Western continent's premier military academy, and graduates are at least powerful warriors of sequence 5 or higher. To defeat a dragon, one must advance to at least sequence 3, or even sequence 2. In human civilization, this would be considered a demigod. Last autumn, during the four-way battle in Hanshu village, Oderziv, a female dragon rider possessing the might of a sequence 2 god of war in the warpath, was pierced through the skull by a single sword strike from Master King in the banquet hall of Hanshu Castle. In that battle, the entire might of Hanshu village, including Loki, Jerome, Lawrence, Katya, and even the pharaoh Nefertiti, was mobilized. Despite nearly everyone being injured, they managed to defeat Master King. However, at this moment, when Loki discovered that his thrown hand axe could actually shatter the dragon rider's head with a single blow, he realized that while his combat prowess was still far inferior to that of the Tang Dynasty sword cultivators, at least he had the ability to fight them. He watched as the Dragon Knight captain, Ander Evans, perished. The last remaining Dragon Knight, after unleashing a dragon breath attack, immediately glided high and retreated from the battlefield like a frightened bird. The long reload time of the dragon-slaying crossbow saved his life. By the end of the battle, the four-nation coalition's ground forces had been decimated, and the entire Moabite corps had been slain by lightning. The battle-hardened Dragon Knight knew that single-handedly fighting against these ferocious Vikings was courting death. Loki did not pursue him. After watching him leave, he organized his men to clean up the battlefield and continued to set up camp. After this battle, he confirmed that he had entered the border of Wessex. The thousands of cavalry killed in today's battle were just the beginning. Tomorrow's attack on the Stone Forest Highlands in the Stone Forest Commandery province will truly show his true strength to these enemies. The monthly votes from the brothers are truly impressive. Yesterday, I achieved 2 small goals. 1. Reached a milestone of 1,000 monthly votes, and 2. 8,000 favorites. While the 40:1 subscription ratio is still disappointing, it's at least a small improvement. 2 more chapters. Chapter 299. Stone Forest County and Rainy Highlands. The English Isles consist of 4 large islands. Within them, Wessex, thanks to its formidable national strength, occupies the prime position. This prime position lies at the English Channel, at the island's southernmost point. Within the entire western continent, the English Isles stand alone, isolated from the mainland. The narrow English Channel connects these islands to the mainland. At its narrowest point, the channel stretches only 34 kilometers, a distance even sturdy Viking seafarers could cross by swimming. On the other side of the channel lie the powerful Duchy of France, the free city-states of the Visigoths, and the regions of Bavaria and Lombardy. All goods exported by the 7 kingdoms of the English Isles must pass through the English Channel to reach the other kingdoms of the western continent. Other commodities needed by the 7 kingdoms, such as ironware, minerals, glass, and tea, must also be transported by ferries across the English Channel to Wessex. From there, they cross Wessex's borders and are transported further afield to Mercia, Wales, and Northumbria. The English Channel belongs to Wessex. Wessex had various means of controlling prices or imposing tariffs on all ships attempting to cross the channel, whether buyers or sellers. Leveraging its immense power, it could easily stockpile goods within its borders, causing shortages in the other 6 kingdoms, which it could then exploit to sell at high prices. Alternatively, it could use its guilds of commerce to align all purchasing merchants and collectively drive down prices. The other 6 kingdoms were furious but remained silent against the might of Wessex. They knew that this kingdom's audacity was due to the backing of the even more powerful Duchy of France. It was precisely because of this partnership that the French rulers, the Plantagenets, were willing to teach the dragon language to Wessex's dragon riders. Even if the rulers of the 6 kingdoms dared to provoke Wessex, they could not afford to provoke the powerful France, now ruled by the Plantagenets, across the channel. This nation possessed not just 10 dragon riders, but nearly 500. Not to mention the Pegasus cavalry, the Griffin cavalry, and hundreds of battle angels. After crossing the border, Loki's army stood at the edge of a sheer cliff known as the Mercian Steppes, nearly 100 meters high. Beneath the steppes lay the first province of Mercia on the border with Wessex, Stonewood County. This region was renowned for its rugged mountain roads and towering, seemingly vertical rock formations. Thousands of years ago, before the Saxons crossed the English Channel, The English Isles were still a barbaric Celtic land. Worshipping the agricultural god Masnach and Dryads, the Celts, with their druidic culture, possessed extraordinary magical powers. Through their natural magic, they could cause all things to grow. This included not only animals and plants. The druids of the Temple of Masnach could even modify immovable mountains, rivers, and even rocky hills into their desired form. With this divine power, they transformed the once blessed English Isles into a paradise of lush trees and exceptionally favorable geographical conditions. Unfortunately, they eventually provoked the arrival of migrants from south of the English Channel. Based on their long-cultivated nature worship, the Druids believed that life was the most precious gift bestowed upon humanity by the god of agriculture. Killing one's own kind was considered disrespectful by the Celtic people, resulting in a shortage of warriors among their tribes. After just a few decades of war, they lost all their homeland and were driven to the frigid plateaus of the far north of the English Isles. Due to the high latitude, the land was a barren wasteland comparable to Scandinavia. None of the 7 rulers valued that land, leaving the Celts to fend for themselves. The magnificent stone mountains, stalagmites, and winding rivers of natural beauty that remained within the 7 kingdoms stood as testament to their existence. This included the magnificent stone forest city, unlike the massive castles built by giants in Scandinavia, or the sea fortresses constructed with the utmost human craftsmanship. Stone Forest City rested on a series of stout, uneven stone pillars. The city's main district, Rainfall Heights, is a series of smooth stone piles rising from the ground, covering an area of approximately 2 square kilometers. A smooth stone bridge, 12 meters wide and 400 meters long, connects Rainfall Heights to the Mercian Stairs. According to Ulysses Elam, thousands of years ago, the Celts, through generations of tireless effort, managed to grow a bridge from lifeless stalagmites. Before this bridge, the towering wall of Mercia stood on the northern side of Stonewood County, like a massive wall. Camel caravans seeking to enter Mercia from Wessex could only sail across the sea, following a long detour along the coastline. Since the Celts used natural magic to grow this stone bridge, caravans can ascend to Rainfall Heights via stairs built around the stalagmites. From there, they can ascend the stone bridge, enjoying the magnificent scenery of Stonewood County as they enter the Mercian Plateau. Standing on the cliff's edge, Loki surveyed the deep gorge and winding karst landscape before him, sighing softly. The cliff's vertical drop reached nearly 100 meters. If his army wanted to avoid the 12-meter-wide stone bridge, they would have to climb down and into the dark crevices of the stone forest. Any reasonable person knew this was an extremely dangerous move. From a 100-meter-high cliff, even a single drop of debris from the English would cause considerable damage due to the terrifying acceleration upon landing. Not to mention, using gunpowder to blast the stalagmites would be a disaster at the bottom of the gorge. Therefore, he had to find a way to cross the arched bridge. However, the Wessex men were no fools. In the middle of the arch, visible to the naked eye, 7 or 8 massive wooden barrels were tightly strapped to its base. It was obvious that these barrels contained no fine wine or spices. They were most likely barrels of black gunpowder from the Tang dynasty in the east. With the Viking army approaching, a stone bridge was completely forsaken compared to the wealthy castles and nobles of Wessex. It was certain that if Loki dared lead his troops onto the stone bridge, they would blast the fragile rock structure in two. Contemplating the perilous bridge, Loki's mind raced. The sea was a foregone conclusion. Wessex certainly hadn't deployed its full naval might, so if a naval battle broke out, the Viking longships would have no chance of victory. Climbing down the valley was also unrealistic. The Wessex people had unashamedly tied barrels to the bottom of the stone bridge, precisely to force him into the deep ravines. Yes. Very good. With a gentle wave of his hand, the satyr, who had followed Loki silently throughout, stepped forward and slammed the blood-red stone statue on his back to the ground. Note, in real history, the Plantagenets wouldn't rise to prominence for another 300 years. Chapter 300 Luke's hesitation. Damn it, this is fucking bizarre. Where have those damned Viking bastards gone? Oh, forgive my French. As the sunset and dusk approached, shrouding the sky in a deep blue twilight, the Duke of Stone Forest County, Fabian Luke, stood atop the spire of the cathedral in Rainfall Heights, gazing across the stone bridge through a jewel-encrusted telescope. He clearly remembered that just half an hour ago, as the sun cast its last rays upon the earth, he had seen a vast, dark mass of Viking troops across the stone bridge. Just as he turned to take a sip of tea, the sun had set. The other side was completely deserted. Duke Luke, to be on the safe side and protect Stone Forest City, we must act decisively and blow up the bridge. This was spoken by Fabian's chief advisor, a polymath from the greater region of Bavaria, the characteristic Germanic severity of whose character made him as precise as a law. Duke Fabian pinched his finely trimmed beard, knowing he had to make a decision immediately. The arched bridge connecting the Rainfall Heights and the Mercian Stairs was created 700 years ago by Celtic Druids using nature magic. It's said that over 100 Druids, living in Rainfall Heights and the Wall of Mercia, daily raised their hands in prayer to the gods, and it took 3 generations to grow this flat stone bridge from the rock. Blowing up this bridge is easy. He only needs to send a Moa rider to fire a rocket from the air to ignite the explosives, and the stone bridge will be instantly shattered by the black powder. With access to the city cut off, the Vikings will either have to climb down the steps into the ravine or sail across the sea to Wessex. Once inside the ravine, Duke Luke has purchased more explosives waiting for them. Buried from above by hundreds of tons of rock, not just mortals, even a behemoth would not survive. As for sailing, they can go anywhere they please. Once on a ship, they are no longer a problem. Stone Forest County, nestled in the rear of Wessex, would be safe from the effects of this war. Duke Luke hesitated to make a decision precisely because this stone bridge was Stone Forest County's lifeline, a necessity they could not afford to lose. According to mortal logic, building a city on a stone pillar 500 meters above the ground would require 10 times as much labor. Egbert expended considerable resources on this difficult undertaking so that camel caravans could travel overland to the Mercian Plateau, saving the immense hassle of loading, unloading, and transporting cargo. If all cargo shipped to the inland archipelago required port resources, he would have to build at least 10 docks, 10 brand new cities. Stone Forest County lacked arable land, animal husbandry, or crafts. Despite this, the county's nearly 100,000 inhabitants maintained a comfortable existence, relying on the stone bridge, seized from the Celts. If it were destroyed, the Celtic Druids, already on the verge of extinction, would have been unable to build a new one. By then, Stone Forest County would be a desolate wasteland. All residents would be forced to migrate and seek new livelihoods. And he, the Duke, would instantly become an ordinary citizen. Duke Luke, accustomed to a life of luxury, could not imagine himself driving a carriage, braving the wind, rain, and snow to load and unload goods, and arguing with others over a few copper coins like a commoner. Not to mention whether the camel caravan's life of sleeping in the open air could support his 7 wives. Even if it could, Lord Luke, accustomed to being a duke, would not be able to endure the hardship. As long as there was a glimmer of hope, he would never order the destruction of the bridge that supported the livelihoods of all the residents of Stone Forest County. Is it possible that the Vikings saw the explosives tied to the bridge and were scared off? Yes, that's very likely the truth. Just think, if it were me, I wouldn't have forged ahead, knowing there were tons of explosives tied to a bridge. People always want to see the outcome they subconsciously desire, so once the thought of the Vikings were scared off appeared, it was hard to shake it off, or, just don't blow it up, blow up the bridge. Am I a fool? This bridge brings me at least 100,000 gold pounds every year. I'd have to be crazy to blow up the bridge. Mumbling to himself, Duke Luke slowly lowered the banner in his hand. At dusk, the church school bell rang at the base of the spire, signaling the end of school. Groups of English children, hand in hand, emerged from the church gates. They walked towards their parents waiting nearby, then crossed the stone bridge connecting the stalagmites to return to their respective terraces. But, what if those Vikings had found some special way to conceal their presence? Duke Luke knew that just a few days earlier, a force of nearly 10,000 had crossed the stone bridge and entered the Mercian Plateau. Yet, the Vikings appeared on the other side of the bridge, indicating that Wessex's defenses were completely wiped out. At that moment, the Stone Forest County, which had been deployed in full force, had only a mere 2,000 militia. If those Viking demons crossed the stone bridge, no one would survive to see the next day's sunrise, including himself. On the one hand, greed lurked in his heart like a venomous snake. On the other, he felt his duty as a lord to the king. Should I blow up the stone bridge? Such a simple question, like a dull file, tormented Duke Luke's soul. The staff who usually offered him advice and city management strategies looked at each other and fell silent. Even the usually upright Bavarian scholar lowered his head. To survive in a civilized society, a wise person must assess the situation. In a situation like this, No matter what advice one offers, a single misstep could lead to catastrophic consequences. Beneath the spire, young children bustled about being picked up by their parents, and smoke rose from every household on the Rainfall Plateau. No matter how fierce the war, civilians still had to provide food for their hungry children and their toiling families. As for the spire's summit, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Duke Luke and his advisors froze like statues, hesitating to make any decision. That was until a blazing red light exploded across the Rainfall Plateau. Group after group of heavily armed Vikings emerged from the portal of light. Duke Luke spotted the towering figure bearing the blood axe, but it was too late. The charging giant shattered the gates of the holy cathedral like a cannonball, and the berserker's furious hacking slashes turned the plateau into a river of blood. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.